Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you to our sustainability members and our many numerous guests that we have on meetings and members of the public who are also joining us for our March sustainability meeting. And I will now turn it over to our chair, Bridget Dix.
Yeah, so I don't know how many members of the committee were either at the public hearing last time or were able to rewatch the video. I know we sent an email sort of, Ashley did, going over, and so did Robin. Thank you for doing that. Kind of bullet pointing some items that the public had talked about and some things that we were also considering. So one of our change recommendations was to allow electric blowers year round for everyone. And some of the suggestions that came were with the exemptions. You know, people were asking about eliminating some of those exemptions. So I don't know if we wanted to discuss that first thing.
I would just like to say my opinion about that. I don't know, as a committee, we are certainly not the experts on what needs to be exempted and what doesn't. But so I'm kind of deferring to Chris, who might know the answer. But I think it would be okay to just leave that part out. Like, there are certain places like the schools that they answer to the state education department. So it really doesn't matter what the village says. So why do we even have to list them in this rule?
Exactly. I think that can definitely be a little bit more clear. You know, we were mirroring what Rye in particular had been doing, and a lot of them do list the schools, even though they technically are not under the jurisdiction. But we can eliminate that to make it clear. Yeah,
it makes it sound like the village is choosing to exclude the school, and that's not true. They can't.
I agree. Yeah,
we can encourage. Lana, as a member of Shoots and Roots, can encourage, but we cannot, as a village. Well, not we. But the trustees cannot mandate what the school district does. So I don't think we should list it. And Chris, you can answer this question. Why do we have to list anything?
You said we have to list anything. By we, you mean?
I mean, as a sustainability committee, I would just as soon not get involved with it at all, because that's not our area of expertise. Whatever the legal counsel to the village is saying has to be in the law, I would say that could be in the law. But I don't see why, as a committee, we need to discuss or advise on that.
Sure. I mean,
that's my opinion.
Sure. Let me kind of go into a couple of the areas you just raised. So you're right. School districts could be removed as an exemption because we can't regulate the school districts. So that could be removed. Just looking at the list of exemptions here. So right now it's listed as municipalities, religious institutions, which we only have one church in Rye Brook. Membership clubs and golf clubs, that's probably the same group, which is the Blind Brook Club. And Bridget and I and Greg and Michael Nowak met with them. We can give, one of us can give you an update on, learning more about what they're doing there and what some of the options and opportunities are. In terms of hospitals, we don't have hospitals, so that's another exemption that can be removed. Retirement communities, right now, it's, I guess you would call that Atria and the King Street home. Although 900 King Street, might be considered as well when that's, if and when that's built. The rest is utility companies, cemeteries, of which we have one, and then driveway and paving ceiling. So, those are the various exemptions. Certainly, you could remove some that just clearly don't apply. The schools, the hospitals, and then one of the, if you ask my opinion, because I'm not a policymaker, but I can give my opinion. Certainly, I think there should be meetings with some of the larger properties if they're going to be included as exemptions or considered, because I think each operation has a little bit different situations on what they're doing. So that might be something that would take a little bit longer to meet with them and see what type of a lift that would be to make that requirement, or should it be transitioned in. From the municipality standpoint, we don't need it to be in the legislation, but the board can always enact policy for us anyhow. So one of the things we thought about in discussing this was the recommendation that when the legislation is passed, that the board could consider establishing the policy for the village. So that's something we could do by policy, which would, for instance, we've talked about wanting to do it in our parks, which is more consistent with what we're doing in this legislation as well. Where we want to be more careful is not exempting it for like public safety issues, trees down in streets, things like that happens where we need to clear streets, which is not always an emergency, but it's something that we want to clear the roads as quickly as possible. I'm not sure I would call that an emergency situation. It's more public safety. So, just speaking out loud, I think it's best if the municipalities were considered as an exemption. That's a policy question. But I think the board could establish policy that clearly sends the directive and tells us what to do or not to do, or what's acceptable.
Thanks for that comment. I know, Debbie, you have your hand raised, so I want to get to you next.
Thank you. So first of all, I just want to say that I was very impressed by the outpouring of comments from the Rye Brook community. And I think that we should all be grateful, both the legislators and the committee, for their participation, because ultimately I think what happens is that we hear all of this feedback and we will end up with better legislation because of it. At least I hope so. So even if it felt that some of the comments were not in favor of any legislation, I think ultimately we're going to end up in a better place having heard from the community. And I thought that was really positive actually for our community to have that. The specific question you asked about was exemptions initially, and I am not in favor really of having exemptions unless absolutely necessary. So clearly for state of emergency, public safety, those types of exemptions. I think from a legislative point of view, to regulate something that applies to homeowners, residents, some of the areas in Rye Brook, but not all, and in particular to not have that hold for the municipality, I really think sends a bad message to our community. You have to do this, but we don't. And I think, when I think of federal government, it makes me think of Congress is going to pass the law that everybody's taxes are going up, but their taxes don't go up, everybody else's does. I think you start getting into those types of things when you say it applies to you, but not to you. So I think we have to be very careful if there are any exemptions at all, that they are exemptions that really need it. I think kudos to, again, our DPW and our administration, and Rye Brook does a great job in our village. And I don't want to put an undue burden on them, but I do think that we need to think about with the legislation, the message it sends if they are not required to abide by the same thing everybody else is. So that is just something that I would say on exemptions. I think, as you already said, a lot of it can probably be left out if it's not even relevant for Rye Brook. We don't have to mention it at all. Joan Feinstein, who was the prior mayor, wasn't a proponent, but really made the point that all the exemptions that we had, even the many of them don't really apply, the ones that do apply, it's about a third of the village. So I think we also have to think about, if we're going to create legislation, the idea is to have it have an impact on the health of our community, of our environment, right? All of those things. And if we exclude a third of our community from these regulations, then we may not really be having an impact. So we want to make sure that we have that balance. If we make everything so narrow that it doesn't apply, then we're really not going to be achieving what we want to achieve with the legislation. So that's my comments on exemptions. Sorry, it's a lot.
No, thank you. I think those are all really good comments. I know I see some members of the public that have their hands raised. I do want to acknowledge you. This is our meeting right now, so we're not doing public comments until we're finished discussing. There will be the April 11th public hearing. If we have time, we would like to hear from you, but we do want to get through this so that we can actually update our recommendations for April 11th, because that's what we're here as a committee to discuss right now. Okay, and does anybody else from the committee have comments on the exemptions that they'd like to state? Michael, I think I see Michael Siegel, you have your.
No, I mean, I guess, Bridget, not specifically on the exemptions, but just wanted to make sure I understand how we're running through an agenda tonight. I know we got a list that, Greg put together of all the public comments. We got the summary of differences. How are we kind of handling all of this? Are we just kind of going to run through it in order, or is there how is the agenda going to work?
Greg, did you want to comment on that? I didn't have a particular order that I was following. I don't know if you.
So the best answer I can give you guys is pretty much how you guys want to do it. You can literally go line by line, or again, as whoever topic anybody's particular item land on, we can do it that way. So best answer is however you guys want to do it.
So I was basically starting with just some of the notes that I had from the public hearing of topics that were brought up a lot by the public. So I wanted to address those first in updating our recommendations, and then we can go to anything else. So the main one was the exemptions, at least that's what I noted. And then we had some suggestions as well. One of the suggestions was no gas blowers on major holidays, suggestions for no use of gas blowers by landscapers on the weekends. I don't know if we want to even get into that as something to consider. I know a lot that was mentioned was the exemptions though. And one of the concerns was that we weren't going to be allowing electric, which we are going to be allowing electric throughout the year. Just to make that clear in our updated recommendations, there will be electric use throughout the year. There was also the calendar that we had, or the time frame that we were considering. So maybe we want to go over that next. Let me pull up. One of the things that was brought up by the landscapers, I know we have Vito Longo here, who is a local Rye Brook landscaper. So we will definitely get your opinion on some of this as well. I know one thing that was brought up by the landscapers is that with, climate change and the way seasons sort of shift around a little bit, that we might want to consider using a calendar that can sort of be moved around year by year, depending on like when the fall actually starts that year, or when the spring does, versus it being like a set date that never changes. Maybe you want to give Rye Brook the power to move that around a little bit more so that it's not so set in stone as like a, exact date on the calendar. So if it needs to start a little bit sooner to allow gas blowers, it can. Do we want to discuss that at all?
I just wanted to talk about the timeline. You brought it up briefly. You mean how quickly this would be enacted? Because that was I can't hear you. You're muted.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. So I'm specifically talking about the phases. The
Right,
council
exactly.
set out for when the gas blower ban would actually be in place.
Exactly. And it was a legitimate concern that as a committee, again, we were not the experts on, the legal, how quickly it would be enacted if the legislation passed the trustees and then it went up to the state and then the state approved it. That would mean immediately the electric in the summer, the electric blowers in the summer would have to be used, and that was definitely a stressor on people and the landscapers they hire, because they'd have to replace their equipment immediately. I don't think as a committee, I understood that. And we had talked in our emails back and forth that that's the kind of thing that it would be best to leave in the hands of the trustees so that they can figure it out, as well as legal, so that it isn't an immediate burden on people, but that there is some flexibility. Again, as a committee, we were focusing more on the environmental issues and things like what Chris, you were mentioning in terms of emergency and safety. We were thinking more about that than how quickly the legislation would be enacted. So I would say, can we leave that to be, say something like to be decided by the trustees?
And I think as far as, just to give some context of what we had discussed before in prior meetings, we always had planned for there to be at least a year of an educational time period where there would be no enforcement of anything. You know, it would just be educating the public on whatever there happens to be, whatever kind of restrictions there happen to be. And so I think
But that didn't come across somehow in the legislation.
Yeah, that didn't come
That's
across.
what we discussed as a committee, but it didn't translate.
So I think, like you said, we need to be more intentional and maybe clear about maybe suggesting that there's at least a year waiting period before it, becomes active or something along those lines.
Or
Sorry, you paused yourself, Robin. Are you muted?
that's all part of what we need to do in terms of community outreach. I don't think we know as a committee what the timeline would make it reasonable. So I think in surveying the HOAs and surveying the landscapers and surveying the people that would this immediately impact, I'm sure the trustees can come up with a reasonable plan to be more of a replacement for current equipment than for people who have invested a lot of money in their business in the gas. Maybe it's a brand new gas powered blower and there's nothing that can be done about it. Also, we had talked briefly, Chris, about how we could possibly give incentives to people to trade in their equipment. I don't know what the village can do, but if there is some kind of a break, a tax break or a reimbursement to people to do something to help them out financially when they're changing from one set of equipment to another, that I'm a little distracted there, that would be possibly something that could make this more palatable.
So I do want to make it clear to the public that we have met with the Landscapers Association, with landscapers multiple times. This isn't something that we've left them out of the conversation on. As far as battery equipment goes, we know that many of these landscapers, because we are one of the few places that doesn't have a restriction in place, many of them already do have electric blowers, battery operated blowers. So we've talked to a lot of landscapers in considering this. And we do understand that there are limitations to current equipment, battery and electric. We do understand that.
If I could just answer the two, I think there was two.
Chris, go ahead. Sorry.
I think there was just two questions that were directed towards me, so I just want to make sure I respond. In terms of if the committee doesn't have recommendations in certain areas for the board, or you think those are better left to the board, you don't need, you of course, these are, you recommend what you're comfortable with. If there's areas you're not comfortable with, or you don't have an opinion on, or think that should be a board decision, I mean, ultimately it's all a board decision, but if you don't have an area that you want to give a specific recommendation, you don't need to. That's up to the committee. In terms of rebates or anything like that, the question is whether that's considered a gift of public funds, which isn't allowed by a government. Sometimes there's grants that do that can happen. So that's something that would take more exploration to see that. But I think just at the outset, we couldn't reimburse people for turning stuff in because unless there's a value on our end, that would be probably a gift of public funds, but I'd have to confirm that.
Can someone tell me why there was a change with the proposal to the committee? Because when we had the meeting last, which I believe was February 2nd that I was part of, I couldn't attend the February 14th. We'd agreed on like one set for the recommendations, and then after the February 14th meeting, there was a proposal to change the restrictions to for each year, that the restrictions were going to be tighter and tighter. And I think it was like year 2025, they were going to allow for electric leaf blowers for like 1 week, I believe, when I remember, in the fall. And then suddenly there was another change that Friday before the public meeting. And then at the public meeting that we had on the 28th, suddenly there was a whole nother change. So, I mean, I'm a member of the committee, and I was surprised and kind of upset too that there were constantly changes. And I am surprised that I wasn't contacted, and I don't believe anyone else was contacted from the committee, from what I could tell, like email blasts of what was happening. So, I mean, I was just confused, and I just felt like it was a situation where it blindsided me during the public meeting, and I think for a lot of members of the community. So can anyone give me any insight as to why that was happening and who was making these proposals?
So to answer your question about allowing electric and having that change, when we were thinking up how to do these restrictions, we based a lot of it off of Rye. And we had it down that they had restricted both electric and gas. So we wanted to sort of mirror what they were doing. They had updated their restrictions now to allow electric throughout the year. So that is the reason why we wanted to do that.
Okay, but why was there a change though, with the, because there was a very specific graph that was presented to us right after the February 14th meeting that was talking about the proposed restrictions for gas and I believe and electric. And it was very tight restrictions, but that was never brought to the public. And I think that, that should have been, so that the public could have been aware of what the plans were. I mean, I wasn't told that was something we're planning on doing, but just that it wasn't, that wasn't revealed as to what the proposal was going to be on Friday before the public meeting. And then again, to have the public meeting and be told at the public meeting, oh yeah, we're going to have electric and gas. And my understanding is the reason why Rye City decided to make it gas and electric is because it's a law that is practically unenforceable because of the limited police means. So, I mean, can someone tell me though, like who made this decision to have it gas and electric suddenly at the meeting?
So once the proposal is submitted, we can't update it as a committee. So what happened was it was me, Ashley, and what we did was we discussed it. This was literally the day before. So we had already prepared everything. I did not know that Rye had updated this, but we wanted it to mirror that. So that was the thought on, updating that.
Okay, this next time, can the committee just update everyone on the committee that that's what they're planning on doing? Because I just felt like, again, just completely blindsided by that.
Yeah, and it's always, I mean, I want it to be as transparent as possible. And I know we had gone back and forth about to allow electric or to not allow electric up until the very end. So it wasn't a decision that was done, to try to do it under the radar to allow electric. All of a sudden, it was something that was just in the interest of mirroring what Rye was doing, because that was what we had discussed this entire time, was to make it similar to what our neighbors are doing. Okay. Is anybody else? Debbie, do you have a comment? I can see that your hand is raised.
Yeah, I'm going to backtrack quickly when we talked about the time. I'm lowering my hand. So the time as far as that goes, it feels like, if and when legislation is passed, that there should be a window after legislation is passed for it to go through the whole process before it takes effect. And the legislators can decide, the trustees, what that time period is. So it's passed on such and such a date and it will take effect, 6 months from now, 3 months from now, whatever that appropriate time period is. And then I just want to clarify a little bit the comments that I heard earlier. And then we had talked about after the legislation has taken effect, it's passed, and then 6 months later it takes effect. That's going to be a hard, concrete date that's in the legislation. That's when it takes effect. At that point in time, we were going to leave, again, whether it's 6 months, whether it's a year, for the enforcement. We had discussed not enforcing it with fines, but using that next time period to educate the residents and everybody about what the new regulations are, and to provide warnings for whether it's 6 months, whether it's a year, whatever that appropriate length of time is. So there's kind of, when does the legislation take place, take effect? And then after that, when do we actually start enforcing with fines, which is what we had talked about would be the enforcement mechanism down the road. So I just wanted to differentiate between those two things. And I also think that I heard earlier in this evening, having varying dates in terms of when blowers can be used, be it gas or electric or whatever we ultimately decide on. And I would just caution us with a recommendation that says that can change based on any particular year and weather pattern that's occurring in any particular year. I think that would be almost impossible to communicate and to enforce to local residents. So it's we know you cannot park on your street. I think it's November 15th through April 15th, right? Emergency snow plowing, you cannot park overnight on the street in Rye Brook. And everybody knows every year that those are the dates. I think it would be very, very hard to create legislation that says, yeah, well, this year we're going to, allow gas leaf blowers to begin on September 30th, but next year it's going to be October 15th because the leaves didn't start falling yet. I just think that makes it very complex. So I think we need to be careful with that type of recommendation. And then the last thing that I just wanted to throw out there is a lot of our conversation was around not allowing electric during those off months, those initial months, and we didn't want any leaf blowers, was if ultimately, we were potentially longer down the road, not going to have any leaf blowing at all, because we're going to get to a point where we don't necessarily need to do that anymore. Then we didn't want a situation where we were moving people toward purchasing electric, only to at some point down the road potentially say, okay, now you can't use that either. So if we've walked away from that in a recommendation because we are allowing electric all year long, I'm wondering, and I know the landscapers may, and people who are doing this may have very valid reasons, but I'm wondering why we might not want to start proposing that rather than having certain times of the year, that we just go in this pattern where we're migrating all electric and we're getting rid of gas entirely. So if we're going to allow electric all year long from the very beginning and never cut it out at all, then should the focus be to move everybody from gas to electric, with the recognition that electric may be here to stay longer term? Or that then electric would be, more limited I'm just wondering why we would be keeping gas from a sustainability point of view. If we're allowing electric all year, why are we going to allow then gas to come back in during the fall months? It's just because of the level of work that's required with the leaves.
I just want to just say that some things were brought up about the electric equipment at the meeting that were of some concern to me. I'm definitely, on board with making our community as environmentally healthy as possible. But I'm a little concerned about the battery situation and if there's enough safety protocol in place, and if the legislation for electric leaf blowers is set for a certain date, that there's also very strict health and safety regulations that go along with it. And I also don't understand completely, and again, I'm not a landscaper, how Crawford Park was able to go all electric without any issue, but and they have a lot of land that they clean off and it looks beautiful. And I don't know how they're able to do it all electric and other places can't. So maybe someone can explain that to me. I'm sorry, there was a few things, the safety and
To
the.
address the with the battery, we did invite or we do have plans to speak with someone, a landscaper that exclusively uses electric and battery for his equipment. Unfortunately, he could not make it tonight, but we will have his input at some point. We have also met with the landscapers at Crawford Park. They gave us an entire tour of how they store their batteries, how they use the equipment, how they like the equipment. And yes, it's beautiful there. They've been doing a great job. So we have seen that, and we talked with them about, the things that they do for battery safety, and there are some options for that as well. But what we've talked to with certain people, certain landscapers have mentioned that they usually don't have the gas and battery on the same trailer, as you call it. They're usually separate. I mean, that's what one landscaper has said, to kind of minimize a fire risk. But it seems like, we have to think about how so many other municipalities around us have these restrictions in place. So there are certainly ways of dealing with it, I'm assuming safely. And so, but we are consulting with more landscapers as well.
I'm also going to jump in for a second, Bob, and answer your second part of your question in terms of why Crawford can do it. As I stated before, Crawford has the 2 parks that they maintain, and that's it. But in terms of our guys, we have 5 different parks in Rye Brook in terms of why we can't replicate what the town of Rye can do. Then when soon as we're going to be Crawford, the town of Rye, as soon as done them, they go right back into the basement. They're not going anywhere. We have to transport them, or in theory, we would have to, from our highway garage to all 5 of the parks that we have. So it's and for them, all the things that we have to take into consideration, whether it be our landscapers or residents, that's not something that the town of Rye even has to think about.
Well, I just think it's important that when we're even suggesting to landscapers, to any large organization within Rye Brook, to use electric, that we're talking apples and apples, because I know we're not Rye. I know we're not like other communities. We're Rye Brook. We have our own unique set of environmental circumstances here. I know in the arbors, we're all about the trees. So obviously we have a lot of leaves. Some other places in Rye Brook don't have as many leaves to deal with. So I just think that we need to make recommendations that would take some of the comments. I don't think people were against coming up with environmentally sound practices, but they were, I think, rightfully concerned that we're looking at all the different situations in Rye Brook and the technology that's available. and make sure that it's all, sorry, my daughters are texting me as I'm talking, that we make sure that it's a logical, fair apples and apples situation. So this area can deal with this, that area can deal with that.
Thanks for the comments, Robin, definitely. I can't see everyone, so I don't know if anybody else from the committee has their hands raised right now or wants to jump in. If so, maybe.
Sorry, Bridget, this is Michael. Just sort of two specific questions, and I put it in the chat. To the extent that you started the discussion off by asking two very specific questions. One is on phase in implementation. I'm okay with that. I'm theoretically okay with the flexible dates each year. I think that was your second question based on the weather, but agree with Debbie that hard to imagine how that would be drafted or enforced.
Yeah, that
Thanks.
seems, and I know when we were first considering this, we talked a lot about keeping it simple so that it's not something that becomes unenforceable or unrealistic. And it does seem like that could present issues. And I don't know if that's probably why nobody else has done that from what I can see. Usually what we had suggested before with the phases was more so for with electric and gas, but just to also have a law that would grow with the times, and hopefully, more and more people would be using non-gas blowers. But do we even want to implement or suggest, I should say, we're suggesting things. Do we want to suggest the phases at all, or do we just want to do one, date range and have that be our suggestion as a committee? Because what we have in the most updated version, there's a suggestion for multiple phases. We can take some of those out, or we can rework that all together if we want to, or just do one timeline, just one simple timeline. I don't know if anybody has thoughts on that.
I think whatever we do, it should be really the least restrictive possible so that the whole community is in agreement with it, and it's also as easy to implement as possible. If it seems that the policy is working and people like it, perhaps it can be retooled later on. But I think the best scenario is everyone has to follow the legislation, whatever it is, but also it be the least restrictive as possible. Okay, with trying to achieve our goals. But I think least restrictive first, and then as it becomes more popular and as the technology gets better, perhaps it can be more restrictive.
Okay. So that would be our initial calendar. And we can always go back to that as well if we need to.
Bridget, you're
I
muted.
think you're muted again.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was just we want to stick on that for if there's any more comments about that from the committee. But I did want to mention that we were able, Chris, Greg, and Michael, we were able to meet with the Rye Brook Golf Club and sort of discuss with them what their operations are, because the public did bring them up a lot as one of the exemptions. So I did want to take a look at what they were already doing and how they were doing that. So we did have a chance to go through, and they do already implement some things. They are using electric blowers for part of the property. Sorry, let me pull up my notes on this. In total, they have around 116 acres, or 160, sorry. But only 50 of those acres are actually maintained, like the, mowed and all that sort of thing. It's more natural. And they do kind of have a buffer zone with the electric blowers near residents. So that's something to also consider. But I do know they were brought up by residents who were concerned about them being part of the exemption. And I know we were talking about trying to remove exemptions. So I don't know if we want to discuss that in particular, or if anybody has comments on that.
Hello, I have a comment. Can you hear me okay?
Bridget, you're muted.
Sorry, just like highly, this is a member of the public. I just want to go ahead.
Hello. Thanks for opening this meeting to the public. I have a few questions. First, what time did this meeting start? Because I saw on the agenda that was posted that it was starting at 7:30, but it looks like
So-
it may have started at 7.
Yeah, we started at 7 this time. I don't know if the agenda was updated online, but this one was 7. And so normally we do start at 7:30. Typically, we would start at
Okay.
7:30.
All right, thank you.
We just started a little bit earlier because we figured this is probably going to take a little bit longer. Usually our meetings run about 2 hours. So,
Yeah.
be a little
No,
bit
it was posted for 7:30, so that's, I joined a little bit before 7:30, so apologies if I missed some of the conversation earlier that may have addressed some of these exceptions and potentially HOA discussion. So for those who I haven't met or don't know, I'm the president of the HOA at the Enclave at Rye Brook. And so I just had a few questions and comments. First, the gentleman from the village who spoke, what is your name?
Greg, sir?
Rex?
There's 2 people
Correct.
on from the staff. One is Greg Rivera, is the assistant to the administrator, and I'm Chris Bradbury, I'm the village administrator.
Great, thanks. So it was the first gentleman that, Craig, did I hear the name? Yeah. You have actually made some really good points just now about the struggles for the village to adhere to this law. Yeah, something about moving equipment around from park to park. Right?
Yeah.
Was that the point you were making?
That was one of them, correct? About from
Yeah.
a municipal
Yeah,
standpoint.
which is thank you for bringing that up. I mean, that's a terrific point. I mean, this is actually probably one of the biggest issues for the landscaping community, in that they are mobile, just like the village is mobile. So the exception for the village seems really strange and odd and quite hypocritical. So thank you for making that point. And then there was another point that I thought Bridget made that was quite compelling. The way the golf course, the Blind Brook Golf Course, who is also exempt as the law is written now, is moving towards electric, it sounds like, Bridget, right? You mentioned that they're already used even without a law or a mandate or a decree or a
So there were concerns.
government requirement.
They had mentioned, and I don't know everything about their operation, but just from what they had, told me, there were concerns previously about noise next to the residential homes that kind of are adjacent to the course. And they did take that into account, and they purchased electric leaf blowers for manicuring that section and also around the clubhouse itself. They do have some electric lawnmowers as well that they utilize. So it's probably not 50-50 yet that they have electric equipment, but they do have quite a bit of it. And of course, there are certain pieces of equipment that can't be electric yet because they just don't have that technology. I'm not sure exactly what those specific pieces of equipment are called, but they did tell us about some of the things that they use to clean the greens that they do have to pull with gas equipment. So
That's great. And so are they legally required to do this?
no, they're not currently legally required to do any of that.
Right, but they're doing it on their own volition and without a law. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, so they did it. I'm not sure how much of it was out of, the public contacting them and saying that they didn't want to hear the noise. But they did do that on their own, and they're
Yeah, that's terrific. I think we're seeing that all over society and certainly throughout Rye Brook, which is wonderful, even without these onerous and ridiculous regulations that you're imposing on the community. But no, the great points being made. Thank you, Bridget, and thank you, Greg. So some other comments I just wanted to make as it relates to the HOA. So have you been considering HOA developments like the Enclave, like Doral Greens, like Belfair, like Arbors, as being exempt the same way golf courses, cemeteries, religious institutions, the schools, the village, hospitals, and all the rest, that covering something like 25, 30% or more of our community? Have you considered including HOAs in the exemption? And again, if this was discussed already at between 7 and 7:30.
I was just gonna say, Lee, we talked earlier how many of us on the committee really didn't want to be involved in the exemption portion. We're not the experts in that. That would be something for the village legal. We would love to have it open to everyone, but for instance, the schools, and you might have missed that part, the schools are under the state education department directive. They're not under the village, so the village cannot tell them.
What about the golf courses and the retirement communities?
Again, I think, as a committee, we're certainly not, we are environmentalists. We would rather everybody was included with this, but it's not something that as a committee we would recommend to have exemptions.
So how did the retirement communities and religious institutions and golf courses get included as exempt in your recommendation?
I would say probably, Chris, you can answer that better than some of us on the committee.
I believe this is language that was in other legislation like RISE and others. I think that's where the exemptions were. I think the draft that was recommended came from other municipalities, and those were typical exemptions that were in that legislation.
I see. So this is Me Too legislation. We're just following other communities. Is that what we're doing?
I'll just jump in a little bit too. So apologies even for the eye compass. Sometimes it gets a little finicky, and when I change some things, it doesn't add on to it. But that was done in mind in terms of for keeping it similar to make it really easier for the landscapers to adapt to Rye Brook. So that way they don't have to have different one for Rye or different one from Rye Brook. That was just one of the rationales. And again, that's really a committee policy direction in terms of how they're going to regulate HOAs. Now, in the beginning, some of them, like public school districts, that we can't regulate because that's just legally, that's where probably we couldn't even do anything there, as Chris explained a little bit earlier in the meeting. Now, the city of Rye does have some private schools, so that's the only reason why I can assume that they included school districts or schools. But again, we don't have, to my knowledge, any public, any private schools within Rye Brook, unless anyone else can tell me differently. I just don't know about that.
There is a private school in Rye Brook.
Okay, yes, I don't know myself, but there is one, thank you. But that's what was one of the rationales for it, just listening from the committee speak over the last several months. But in terms of HOAs, it's a policy perspective in terms of how they want to go about that. And in terms of municipal, so we are buying a couple electric leaf blowers ourselves. That's what the superintendent of public works has been tasked with doing, which she is doing. And seeing some comments in the chat, I did explain this to the landscapers too. And it's not that we're saying that they don't have a difficult job and that they're also everyone's short staffed. As I said, we have our skeleton crew. But in terms of the work portfolio for the DPW department is a lot different than what landscapers are going to be dealing with. And we have to deal with roads, we have to deal with public parks. So those are all things that in terms of when considering the exemption for DPW, when we sat down with them, that was taking consideration to grant that to them. And it's not unique to Rye Brook. A lot of the municipalities have done it, have exempted the municipalities from the legislation. But again, we are moving direction too as well, because we do recognize that from a standpoint, from municipal operations standpoint, that we do have to start moving that direction ourselves.
Yeah, and that's commendable.
If I could just add, and this again, this is not a public hearing for tonight, but this is a sustainability committee, but we would need to make recommendations. But just to touch on those two quick comments, when you heard Greg mention earlier about the transportation, that is similar to landscapers, but what he was talking about was why Crawford Park is handled differently because they keep everything on site. All their equipment is on site. So, and that that reference that you heard was comparing how Crawford Park does it versus the municipal staff, which is more similar to like how the landscapers transport.
Exactly.
That said,
Yes,
I'm gonna
thank
say,
you,
wait,
Chris.
let me finish. So then the other part, I just want to make 100% clear. We are purchasing electric blowers for our parks to use them just like we're in the same season that the proposed legislation has in front of the village board for the residents. So we do intend to do it exactly what's said in the legislation. We intend to do the same thing in our parks.
Which is fantastic. I love hearing that you're doing this without being legally required. That's absolutely amazing. Terrific, wonderful. So thank you for that clarification, Chris. So also on the HOA, so just I want to just make sure that we're considering where these developments are located in the community. So you have Belfair, Doral, Enclave. I mean, these are all fairly isolated away from the Rye Brook single family home districts. If you look at Doral Greens and the Enclave, and we're adjacent to Blind Brook Country Club and Doral Arrowwood, which I think at this time is still characterized as a golf course, and which would both be exempt. And then on the other side of both Doral and Enclave, we have Connecticut, also exempt from this law. And then looking at Belfair, their property includes Atria, which is a retirement community and already called out as exempt. And then you look at the rest of Belfair, that borders on Purchase College, exempt, the airport, exempt. And then also I just want to remind the committee that these HOAs and these developments, they don't receive street sweeping services from the village. So we're already contributing to reducing the pollution impact in our community by not having the street sweeping, heavy machines, pollution, belching machines sweeping the streets of these communities. So we're already making our contribution to reducing the pollution impact in the community. Just want to make that really clear. And that because we don't have the street sweeping services and those heavy machines coming through, we rely on the blowers to handle those regular cleanups. So, I mean, what you're doing here to the HOAs and developments that are already taking on the burden of maintaining their streets, without the village, is just complete overreach and just onerous on these communities. And you're talking about 1,000 homeowners in this community when you look at these developments and how many homeowners actually live there. So it's a pretty significant number. So I just hope that's just being considered when you guys are thinking about these exemptions and how to handle this stuff, because this is really just completely unfair and hypocritical, especially with the village itself not being imposed with this restriction. So I just wanted to make that clear to this committee that what you're doing here is just really quite onerous, and what you're imposing is just really something that's unfortunate to see.
Okay, thank you for your comments, Lee. Are there other committee members that wanted to comment before we move on to anything else on this list?
But let me just also make
Go ahead,
mention to you guys, the members of the public, this is not a public hearing. Again, this is for the committee members to go over this legislation. If we have time at the end, again, the chair can call on you. Again, the public hearing for local law, whatever we come up, will be April 11th.
Okay.
Yep. So anyway, I'll just note that I'm formally requesting that this committee consider HOAs to be included in their exemptions and the exemptions that are currently included in this legislation. So that's my formal request.
Got the letter from the attorney as well in the comments.
Okay. So we've discussed in potential changes, we have discussed exemptions. We've discussed electric being allowed year round. Have we, and I know we want the village to be doing some of these things like Robin has said, you know, versus us. Did we want to include, you know, major holidays, any other things within an updated recommendation? We are only recommending things as a committee. So were there any other thoughts on things you might want to recommend in this updated form? Oh, okay.
I
Greg,
liked what Brandy said before, that I think making this as least restrictive as
Okay.
possible would be my vote.
okay, so and I think what we'll need to do is probably go back and forth, lay all this out in an email, and then vote with all the members on, you know, what kind of calendar we want to vote for, you know, whether it's the just one phase and that's it. So we can lay that all out afterwards and then do a tally vote on all these subjects if we need to. But I think it'd be good to have it maybe written out beforehand so we can change it if we need to before we actually vote as a committee what we want to do. So, okay. I think that was most of the concerns that we've sort of gone over, things to change. Greg, then did we want, I know Vito, you're here. I know we were going to give you the floor for just a little bit. We don't have too much time because we do want to move forward, but I do want to say thank you for coming to the meeting. And if you wanted to comment as a local landscaper.
Do you hear me?
Yes. Hi.
Thank you very much for having me. And thank you very much for the work that you guys done to get this here. Me as a landscaper, we as a landscaper, we do agree we need to do something with noise. And so we're willing to work with it. But as quickly as people want to do it, it's the problems we have trying to get, if you want to say, use all these battery operated things. Each battery that we get probably lasts 45 minutes to an hour. So if you were to have an 8-hour day, you need eight batteries per blower, and each crew probably have 2 or 3 blowers. So you're talking anywhere from 24 to 48 to 64 batteries, depending on the size of your crew, and having those charged all day long, which they'll take anywhere from 60 minutes to 120 minutes to fully charge. The power that these blowers put out is nowhere close to what the gas blowers do. And so if that's the case, it's going to take you 2, 3, 4 times longer to hear that noise of an electric blower, a battery operator versus a gas blower, because they do not do the same amount of work. So that, I think, has to be looked at before we decide to do it. Now, as far as a time frame, it does vary a lot in the time frame. You know, you're saying that you want to use it going from May 1st through September 30th. You know, the month of June is the heaviest month for grass. Grass grows very thick and it grows very, very, very quickly, and it clumps up. So when you're out there cutting grass, I don't care if you bag it, if you use mulching blade, you're still going to get clumps of grass all over the place. So that has to be blown out. And if we had to, as some people suggest, we had to go out and rake that, it's just not feasible. Not only because it's not feasible, the manpower is not there, and the cost that we would have to pass along for the manpower is I don't think it will work to a lot of these residents. So I think that part has to be looked at. You know, and I also think, you know, that everybody's saying we just want to do what the other towns do. That's great, but you know, some of these other towns are just doing it because it's a little bit different than other areas. And I know that recently up in Massachusetts, up in Falmouth, Massachusetts, they rescinded that law that they passed no blowers from May 1st to September 30th. They rescinded that. They went back to whatever the law was. So I think that you're going to get a lot more of that going forward. So that's, that I just feel that at this time, we're not ready to work with the equipment that's out there. And then the other thing I just wanted to talk about is, which a lot of people spoke about, mulching blades. I think mulching blades are great, as I said, in March, April, half of May, July and August when grass is not growing. Other times it will not work because it's just a lot of stuff. Back in, I guess it had to be about 4 years ago, one of my customers off of King Street said, Vito, for the month of October, I want you to mulch all the leaves into the lawn because I want to stay in the lawn. We did it. After the first week that we mulched the leaves into his lawn, he told me not to mulch them anymore because what happens, Rye Brook has a lot of trees. And when all the leaves build up and you break them up, they don't break up into many small pieces. They just form a layer and layer, and it keeps going. And over time, that layer is going to be over 6 weeks. It could be anywhere from 6 to 12 inches, and it just sits there. So I think the mulching blades for getting rid of leaves, I don't think it's going to work personally. So I thank you for having me and listening to us. I'm very happy to see that Rye Brook is listening to the landscapers and to the residents, and hopefully we could come to an agreement that would make everybody happy. Thank you.
Vito, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Have you serviced other communities that have similar restrictions in place? If so, how have you adjusted to that? Is there or do you just service Rye Brook? I'm sorry.
I service Rye Brook and Harrison only. That's all I service.
Okay. And as far as I know, you mentioned June is the month when the grass is the thickest. So you pointed that out as an issue potentially. And then you mentioned October. Of course, we wouldn't have restrictions on gas in October, just to be clear. So people could. We do want to account for the fall cleanup and the spring cleanup. But we will definitely look into June as well and take that into consideration. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you.
Okay. I can't see anyone. Is there anybody else from the committee that would like to comment before we move forward?
Bridget, it's
Debbie, I think I can hear you kind of cutting in and out, but
can you
I
hear
can.
me?
Yeah.
Okay. So were you. So what I'm wondering is whether, I don't think any of us spoke at any Larchmont. I respect the fact that I agree that we need to do what's right for Rye Brook, but it helps when other surrounding communities, maybe similar to us, have enacted to look at what they've done and how it's working there. And Larchmont does not allow any gas-powered leaf blowers and has limited times where they can use electric. It went into effect January 1st, 2022, and I think it would really be beneficial for to hear how they're managing with this and understand if they've had this legislation here, what their land experience, their residents, the community, to really get an understanding of how they are making it work, because maybe it is working, maybe it isn't working. I think that would be for us to get an understanding of, how it's working there in a community that does have a much restrictive policy in place right now, because they face the same challenges that we are facing, and perhaps there are solutions that we're not thinking of, or something out there that they have implemented that's making it work.
I do want to say,
would,
thank you. No, that's great. I do want to say that I did reach out. So I have reached out to several. I can't say I've heard back from Larchmont. I did hear back from the Mamaroneck, Rye, and I have invited them. They were not able to attend this meeting, but hopefully in the future, maybe we can correspond with them via email, because like you said, they do have more experience with this than we do. So just to get some more insight from other places.
And White Plains as well is.
as well.
Yeah, so White
Yeah.
Plains is new. I think they just, if I'm correct, I think they just passed a ban on gas blowers. So that's a very recent change.
Yes, I think as of May 15th, they are instituting a year-round prohibition. So it'll start this year.
Okay. And I'm sure we can get Rye. I know Rye had specifically said that they would be happy to speak with us some more. So maybe we can do some sort of separate get together, since I know April 1st or April 11th, I'm sorry, is the public hearing, getting together with them beforehand, even in a more informal meeting, just to discuss what they're doing. So I will try to reach out to them again to see if we can do that. Were there any other comments from the committee? Okay. Greg, do we want to move on to the next item on the agenda and circle back to this with voting on items and kind of getting into the exact dates and details? We can do that via email. That way we can actually do a formal vote that way so that everyone can vote, or how should we proceed? Or how do you recommend?
It's really honestly how you want to proceed. I mean, if you want to go through that, again, we can. And so we have all the list that actually Chris helped prepare. We have all the different comments that we've pretty much heard. If that's something that, I know we went through the main ones, but if you want to go through that, or if you want to circle back to, if you want to go on to a couple of agenda items that we have, you can do that as well. And, or if you want to allow public comment,
I think we can allow some brief public comments. I know that the Arbors has had their hand raised. I see your comment, so not ignoring you. So why don't we have, I believe we have maybe 2 members of the public that want to speak. So if we could just limit it to 5 minutes or less, that'd be amazing. But I'm gonna hand it over to the Arbors right now, and then we'll get to the next person.
Appreciate it. Thank you. So this came up during the 900 King Street conversation. I was at a village meeting, and we started talking about this with some of the village board members. And I stated at that meeting that the Arbors would be in favor of gas-powered leaf blower ban in the future when the technology was there. I mentioned at that meeting that probably we need a 2 to 3 year grace period once the law was put into place, simply because most of the HOAs are on multi-year contracts with vendors, which prices are set as well as raises. Can make it very difficult, as well as our dues are set for our community in order to implement these things. Our landscaper, well, we were called by the village, and I put them in touch with Adams Property Service out of Port Chester, which is our landscaping company. He went to a national conference and asked to report back. I think he may have spoke to you, Chris, after he went. And what he reported back was there was a new, and I mentioned this in one of the up there in the chat, there's a new backpack blower that seemed promising, especially for, and I appreciate you opening up the summer cleaning for electric. Should be able to handle the grass clippings and things like that for the community. But the walk behind technology, where they actually have, you push it, it's not a backpack, but the whole thing is in front of you, and it's much more powerful, gas powered. There is no electric alternative to that. And in a place like the Arbors, not only is it 37 plus acres and the amount of trees in the Arbors is excessive, there's just no technology that currently exists so that he can run this place, without using gas. And so, he's totally on board as well as a landscaper. We're totally on board. Just as private citizens, anything that can lower is important. But ultimately, the technology has to be there. And the danger with doing something in Rye Brook, and I understand some other municipalities are starting to do this, but really when Westchester doesn't make this decision, and instead it's piecemealed by one small municipality versus another, you get landscapers who often do this sort of area, like Vito over here, whose business is in this area, who's now has to make very big changes that they may not be financially prepared for. When a larger municipality like Larchmont or White Plains does it, inevitably, usually the landscape companies that work there tend to be larger landscape companies who can handle the business and may be able to handle the expenditure. I know our landscaper has said that they are going to struggle. Both C&K before we had Adams Property Service and Adams Property Service both mentioned, because this was brought up 2 years ago, that they didn't think they'd be able to continue with the contract as it stood if we went to ban gas entirely. And I know that's not, at least it doesn't seem like the exact plan now, but I just want to make sure, because we all want to do this in the future, that as long as the technology is there, we'll follow you. But, you know, to the comments that people have made here about the perception of unfairness, fine, you can't regulate the schools. But, you know, if a place like a Blind Brook Country Club can't do their 50 acres and only does the periphery with electric, we're 37 acres. I don't know how we're then supposed to be able to do it if they can't. And I will say that the Arbor is in the same plan unit development as the school. We share property with the school. We maintain several parts of the school's property for them, which is on our side of the fence. And so there's a little bit of a gray area that gets a little confusing as well. So, you know, I'm all in favor. I want this to move forward. I just want it to be done at a time where we know the technology is there and our landscapers can do this. And once that is there, that could be a year, that could be 2 years from now. But once the technology is there, you'd have our complete support. We just don't believe that that's now.
Thank you for your comments. I know, I think we have a few other people from the public. I can't see everyone, I'm sorry, on the screen. So I'm just trying to count and see. So I think we just have 2 more. Again, if we can just keep it to 5 minutes or less. I know Michael, we have 2 Michaels that have their hands up. I'm going to address the one that has the video on. Michael, I'm going to give you 5 minutes, if you can hear me.
Yes, thanks, Bridget. Michael Iorio, President of New York State Turf and Landscape Association. Thank you for inviting us and let us attend. Few questions. We did have a Zoom meeting with Greg before, I guess, the Sustainability Committee was going to pass this, and we brought up some of the issues. There's been some new issues. I don't know if the Sustainability Committee is aware of them. Have you ever heard of the organization AGSA?
Yes, I have, just from speaking with you guys, I think, from speaking with the landscapers. Yeah.
Okay, they're an independent company, just so I guess the whole board knows or doesn't know, that has been doing tests on batteries and the use of batteries and where they work. Do we as an organization feel that we're going to have to eventually go to batteries? That's the wave of the future. However, like Vito said, currently the technology is not there. So we come with the position of we need to do a compromise. And Vito basically gave the compromise situation. But what I'd like to share to the Sustainability Committee, an independent consulting firm that basically represents sustainability and batteries, states that current technology, current availability of battery, you cannot do the job, as the HMOs have stated, as regular customers, homeowners state, and as your own DPW states. The technology is not there, manpower is not there. So I think you guys are a little bit premature in trying to force the non-use of a gas-powered battery backpack blower right now. And if you'd like, I can forward, if you give us an email, I could forward you the documentation on it. It might help you in making your decisions.
Yes, if you could, that would be great. You could forward it to Greg. If you already have his contact info, then he can send it to.
Yes, I do. I'll send it to him.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. I think we have another Michael that has their hand up to speak.
Yep, that's me.
Hi.
Do you hear me? Hi, how are you?
Yes.
So thanks again for the opportunity just to let us weigh in here. I'm gonna be pretty quick here. I agree with I echo the comments that Lee Freund made from the Enclave. Just to give you context, I'm one of the directors on the Belfair board. We share a similar sentiment to Lee as well. And I just, again, I was at the meeting last week, and I don't want to belabor the points I made at the meeting last week. The other things we need to consider, like, again, I'll reiterate this point. We're so concerned about the noise, we're so concerned about the pollution, but yet we have planes taking off and landing every 3 to 4 minutes in this town between the hours of 6 o'clock in the morning and 11:30 at night, sometimes well past 11:30 at night. So, like, I understand we want to limit overall noise and overall pollution, but, like, I think step one needs to be is, we need to take that into consideration here as well. Like, there's other factors here, and a leaf blower that's being used for 5 minutes at most, maybe 10 minutes at most. It's not really a big deal in the grand scheme of the fact that you've got large jets flying overhead. Look, many other people here, they made the point that the technology, while it's coming, while it's the wave of the future, again, I'm not opposed to the technology. It's just, it's not there yet. The technology is not there. It's not going to do the job that we expect. Properties aren't going to look as manicured as we expect them to be. And, from a cost perspective, I mean, my members have been shouldering inflation costs. Inflation has been 8% the last 2 years. I can't go and pass on another $30 increase a year to my members. It's just not fair to us as a community. And not only that, the village and the municipality, they're going to go and purchase all new electric equipment to meet this regulation if it goes through. So now my tax dollars are going to go up on top of my HOA dues. So, you guys got to look at cost benefit here a little bit more. And, the decisions of 6 people on a sustainability committee may not be right for a community of 9,000 people. So that's all I'm going to say. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak and give my input here. And, I look forward to seeing what ultimately gets decided.
Thank you for coming and sharing your opinion. I do want to make it clear, as a committee, we do not actually make the laws. We are just making suggestions and recommendations. So this will then be voted on afterwards and not by us. But I do understand what you're talking about with the airport as well. Unfortunately, we do not have any authority over that. But I do sympathize, and I understand that that is an issue for a lot of people as well. So thank you for bringing that up.
Bridget, you cut out again.
Greg, did we have anybody else that wanted to comment before we move on to the next part of our agenda, potentially? I also want to ask the committee, do we want to move forward with the things that we have mentioned and discussed, setting that out and then voting via email? Is that how we want to approach this, our recommendations? Or do we want to try to go through all of that right now with the dates and then vote potentially on this Zoom? I'm opening that up to you guys, to whatever you want to do.
Yeah,
Michael?
Bridget, Michael, the extent you're asking, yeah, I think because we've got some important voices on the committee that couldn't be here tonight, I would agree with putting the recommendations down in an email, circulating it, and then putting together an agenda for a vote.
Okay.
Again, there's particularly Ashley and others, I kind of would want them to have the opportunity to participate in finalizing the recommendations.
I think it would also be good, that my own opinion, to not rush
Right.
It's because, of course, we can miss some things. And I know we have some items that are being sent for us to consider from the public as well. And whatever we do vote on for recommendations, it's all going to be made public, and then it will go up for the public hearing on April 11th. So the public will be able to see all of that. So it's not any sort of secret exchange or meeting. That's all going to be sent to Village of Rye Brook, and then they'll publish it and post it so that the public can view it. Okay, is that everybody else's thought as well? Did we want to move forward with doing that via email, or is there any opposition? I should
I think
say.
that's a great idea.
Okay, so
Agreed.
I think we're going to move forward with doing it that way unless there's opposition to it, and move on with the agenda then. Greg, did you want to move forward with the next item on the agenda for tonight?
Again, I did want to ask one question while we have Chris here. I'm just going to another agenda item real quick. So just Community Events Committee, which I'm a part of, they've made the request for our community tag sale. If we can maybe do it May the 6th. I personally don't have any objection one way or another, but I just want to ask the Sustainability Committee, is that something that would be acceptable to all of you guys?
What date did you say?
They asked if we can do it on May 6th.
That's
Could
my
you clarify maybe what the main reasoning was behind them wanting May 6th as a date? Was there a specific reason that they wanted to move it?
Largely because main one I can remember, and then Chris, if I'm leaving any main reasons out, or Susan, because they both are both on the meeting with me. The weather, because of how hot it was last summer, maybe more people will participate. Maybe easier during that time frame when you have maybe have less events in July. You have more events in July, so maybe it'll be easier in May. And if I'm missing anything, Chris, feel free to jump in.
No, I think that was the only comment we heard was July was very hot. That was very hot then, but you know, we're open to ideas or open to suggestions if people have other suggestions. I know, but people did say maybe if we do it earlier in the year, or you know, just be a little bit more comfortable for people.
Yeah, I can definitely, it was definitely hot. It seems like for whatever we do, we end up picking the hottest day no matter what, even though we try to pick, you know, a nice day. I guess the only issue that I have and my only concern is just rain. That's always what I am concerned with, is if we get rained out the first Saturday and then it rains again the next one, it's, you know, it's just canceled for the year at that point. So I know the later we go into summer, the less chance of rain there is potentially. I believe, but I'm personally not opposed. I don't know if other members of the committee would want to move it. I know we had decided before the date that we had put down was, look this up. July. So I don't know if anybody else has thoughts on that, moving it. I mean, it is much sooner, so, but we do sort of already have everything ready, because it's one of those events that we don't actually need us as members to be there to participate. We advertise it, we put up the banners, and then we have the online sign up. So it's not as intensive in like what we actually have to do, since it's already sort of put together.
I'm okay with having it in May. I just don't want to have it on that weekend just because there's Cinco de Mayo.
Okay. And then on the 14th,
And what I was going to say is
Mother's Day, right? So
exactly, that's what I was going to say. We just have to pick a date that doesn't conflict with days.
May the 20th.
May 20th. Okay, yeah, that looks like there's nothing there. I mean, I'm fine with that. If we want to move it to May 20th, then the backup date would be, if we're doing it the same, the 27th. Which it doesn't.
Memorial Day weekend.
That would be Memorial Day is that Monday. I don't necessarily think that would be I guess maybe people are going out of town, so that's something to consider. As the backup, if it does rain on the 20th, then we'd have to consider that. So I don't know. Do we want to think about? I feel like April will be even rainier, but I'm not sure. So I'm trying to figure out when it's not going to rain.
Just one idea that we have some kind of a list of people that participated last year.
Mhm.
Might be the most likely people to participate this year. And if we had some kind of a survey, I think we would know if those people would become involved again. Because I know in May I couldn't. Not that the decision should be made based on me.
No, yeah.
I think that it's not really just us on the committee, but it's everyone who participated.
And one of the
That's actually a
considerations
good idea.
last time too was, I'm sorry, was that we wanted people to have enough time to prepare to gather their items. I know people, obviously collect things to sell. I can do a poll on our social media. I don't know, Greg, do you have an email list of the people who have participated? Is that something that we save or?
So I have that, all the residents from the first couple times. I did do a survey from SurveyMonkey myself. A few of them did respond, and they said that they would be willing to do it again, but it's just the one comment that they weren't happy with was the weather.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
can
and
we,
I do have a spot. Go ahead. Sorry, Debbie, go ahead.
I also have a question. When we were talking about rain dates, if we were going to move it and we're dealing with all these holidays, we consider doing a Saturday and having the rain date be that Sunday.
We've discussed that
Reason why
before.
we could
We
not
could
do
definitely
that.
do that. So if we did like Brandy had suggested doing the 20th, there's nothing that I can see on the 21st. I don't know if there's any village events that would, derail that, but we could do the 20th as the main date, the rain date potentially as the 21st then. And that might work.
And we stay away from Sundays for most of the village events for us because of double time for highway and stuff like that. But this doesn't require any of that, so it doesn't matter.
Okay. So that might work. So maybe we can do a poll. I don't know if we want to have, so I guess our poll could be asking, do you want May 20th and 21st, or do you want the original dates we had already planned? And I can put that up on our social media, and then maybe we can vote also on that via email. If we don't get a big response via social media, we can kind of think about it and decide if we want to do it in May instead. So I know there's like websites and stuff that can tell you what the chance of rain is, so we can always look that up and see. But I'm just writing this down. Okay. Greg, did we want to move on to the next order of business then? If nobody else has comments on the tag sale, I think my thought was we were gonna kind of operate it the same way as we did last time with the website, putting up a banner, the shopping center, and doing the online advertising. I don't know if there's any other ideas of how we want to do that, but that was what I was thinking at least. Okay. I think next for me is sorry. Bye, Chris.
Bye-bye. Good night, everybody.
Night, Chris. Thank you for coming.
The next order of business for me is going to be the seed swap. So Greg was able to reserve this is in collaboration with Portchester Sustainability Committee. And we were able to reserve the library. This is going to be in April 29th. So this event usually gets a pretty good reception, like we've talked about, from the community. So hopefully it'll continue to do that. The library did say that if it does rain, they will have a room inside reserved for us as well, so we can do it indoors if the weather happens to not be good. But it will be taking place on the 29th of April. So, and I don't know if any committee members would want to also help. I think it's we reserved it, if I'm correct, is it from 10 o'clock or 10 to 2?
This is what we've done the last couple times. Again, it doesn't have to be, that's why I reserved it, but again, I can always change it.
Okay, so we reserved it from 10 to 2. So if anybody, you obviously don't have to stay the whole time if you're only available at the beginning. If you want to come and help, more than welcome to. It seems to do okay with just 3 people usually, but it always helps to have more people to help and to talk to the residents that are coming by to look at the seeds, because a lot of times people just have questions about well, what should I put here? What do you guys have? You know, and they want to talk about like what the flowers look like and, you know, native gardening, things along those lines. So if you have an interest in that, and you want to volunteer, we could use you. That was the last thing on my agenda. Greg, did you have anything else?
But just if I'm just throwing in my advice in terms of, again, of course, we have Ashley and Frank who can't be with us, so we definitely for something like leaf blowers, we want everyone's input. But my best advice I can give you tonight is in terms of between us to start with is to kind of verbalize in terms of what exactly you're going to be voting on. And what I mean by that is that with everything we just heard, and not just exemptions, but any other comments here, I think that before we leave tonight, it's worth discussing. So that way there isn't that sort of any sort of confusion in terms of where we all stand or where the group stands on certain issues. Now, does that mean that all of you have to agree on every single thing? No. But at least you air that out now, so that way we don't have any confusion for the public hearing in terms of, or not just the public hearing, but our follow-up emails that we'll have for the next several days and a couple weeks, what exactly we are trying to agree on.
Yes. So what I will try to do after this, or if anybody else wants to as well, is just sum up what we went over and the things we might want to vote on, and then we can discuss those items. If any in particular need to be discussed, we can go back and forth on that via email, or even make separate emails for different issues, and then vote on those issues as a committee for the final recommendation.
And I really think that we're hearing a lot of people who are giving the opposition to this legislation, but I don't feel, with all our discussion, and we've talked about why, about the benefits of the, but there are so many communities in Westchester that have already enacted legislation. And I really think it's important for us to hear from them. I just, you know, they've all done it. So I listen to the feedback that, you know, well, shouldn't just be, well, me too. So we have to do it. I think that's how we're coming across as a committee and a, you know, recommendation. Well, they did it, so we're going to do it. And we're not coming across as if we're thinking it through for our own. I don't know. I think we should just be cautious of our credibility. And I really think that I would like to hear from these other communities in Westchester who are similar to ours, who have enacted this legislation, to see what pitfalls they've experienced and what successes they've experienced before we finalize this next draft, so that we can really understand. Because, you know, change is hard for everybody. We're moving in that direction. I'd really like to hear from the people who have done it already, you know, what they experienced working for them. You know, I just feel like we're missing that piece, and maybe that all happened before I was on the committee. But that's just something that I would really like for us to hopefully try to get access to. And I'm happy to reach out if you want me to reach out to any of these communities as well, that you haven't reached out to or that you haven't heard back from. Let me know how I can help. But I would really like to hear more from the other side before we finalize our next recommendation.
Okay, and so far I reached out to Rye, Bedford, Mamaroneck, and I want to say one other. I want to say potentially Larchmont, but I'm not remembering off the top of my head. So I will confirm that. I know those three did respond back to me. They weren't able to attend our meeting, but they did respond that they would be willing to, you know, converse with us about it. So maybe it has to be via email. I don't know, but or we could try to set up, you know, another meeting just with them to discuss some of these items. But I'll try to do that. And then of course, if you have anybody that you know, more than welcome to also.
I think though, when we were looking at research, like one of the biggest pitfalls was the enforceability aspect of this. When we had done research for the city of Rye, it was the reason why they had decided to repeal their restriction is because they just weren't able to enforce it. And then also in Greenwich, they had been trying to pass more restrictive bans, but it just wasn't successful because they just found again that it was unless the community was really for it and it wasn't too restrictive, then it was just going to be a problem being able to enforce it. And I had also shared with all of you, and I believe this, I don't think it was last summer, I think it was the summer before when I believe we were talking about this, was in Los Angeles when I was living there about 20 years ago. It was the same thing. It's really an enforceability issue. So just me personally, I think the thing is that we need to make sure that this is whatever restriction we agree on, it's something that's popular enough with the community and the community wants to do it, which I think can be, again, it can be improved if we have less exemptions, that we have more people that, we're all in, even with the schools, if we can show that, because one of the aspects of this was protecting some of our more vulnerable members of the community, our elderly, our young people, and showing that the whole community is in this, I think is very important, because if we can see from the HOAs, they're all looking for ways to get exempted. Okay, and so I can foresee that, if we pass something and it is restrictive, and if we allow exemptions, what's going to follow is there going to be lawsuits. And if a golf course is exempt, then why isn't an HOA exempt? And the whole point of this is not to be playing games, trying to figure out ways, so people can say, oh yeah, well, I'm exempted and I don't have to follow this rule, is to have this be something that's popular enough with the community. It fulfills the community's needs, which are trying to make the environment that this legislation is more environmentally safe, that it's easy to follow, and that people want to follow it. And I did see when I was there at the public meeting last week, people were interested in having some type of legislation that would promote environmental sustainability. But the biggest concern was they found that the legislation was too aggressive. So I do feel that something that is just less is more. And if we were able to do that, and it isn't something where it becomes a part where a neighbor is telling another neighbor, oh, I hear a leaf blower, and the police are called, a situation like that. I think that would make the community support this, and we wouldn't have to worry so much about enforceability because it would be somewhat self-enforced. Okay.
Thank you, Randy. No, I agree and echo some of your thoughts on that. And I'd like to write some of that out as well for our points, new recommendations.
You guys get the you mentioned it earlier regarding the court case in Scarsdale.
So Greg sent out an email that had 3 attachments that he's mentioning, and one of them, there's a resident that is in favor of the ban that mentioned that there was a recent court case in Scarsdale, I believe, and that somebody, I'm not sure who it was, that's it. Greg, you might over it probably better than I do at this point, so I'll let you mention that.
But yes, I'll just bring it up again. I actually ended up when I was in Florida, was when this was sent to me, so I'm just gonna pull this thing up real quick. So basically, it was a
The case
precedent.
is actually from 1996, so it's not really that recent.
Yeah, that does say it's not super recent, but again, it actually,
But they lost the lawsuit.
it's helpful because
They
again,
lost the lawsuit.
it says here that they won. Yeah, so the court ruled in favor of the village that the ban was not unreasonable, and the Scarsdale Village Code properly addressed valid government objectives, because the residents were, I guess, raising points. Well, the village is intruding on my rights as a homeowner, take care of properties, etc. But again, I'm not aware of this court case. Again, I'm only just reading what I was just sent here, that if we're, from what this says is that the village was successful in their lawsuit. So if that's to be the case, in terms of for us on legal ground, in terms of we would be on solid footing because that's the precedent set by our state judicial system.
And I would also say, I think that's the job of the Rye Brook attorney that is looking over everything that we suggest, that he's supposed to then tell us, okay, you can't do this, you know, if it's something that is not, because I mean, I don't know. So
Well,
that's his job. So hopefully he would red flag anything like that.
And that's what, yeah, we did check with the attorneys and all of this, and we're in legal footing. So the residents, I'm just gonna be honest, I'm not a lawyer, they could sue all they want, or anybody could sue all they want. Now, again, like you said, in terms of the policy decisions, that's of course for you guys to make and recommend to the board, and the board, of course, ultimately is the final decision. But just in terms of the legal aspect, without me not being an attorney, I know some of you here are, but we're on solid legal footing for all these recommendations that we've made. And even if we do make some revisions, again, the attorneys will tell us whether we're in compliance or not.
Can I ask a question of Robin and Brandy? Because you both used, you know, that your recommendation, your thinking right now at this stage is to have this legislation be as least restrictive as possible. And the legislation as it was originally proposed before we changed it basically said no leaf blowers from, and I forget the specific dates, if we started in May through September, and then you could use gas and electric if you wanted to for the remainder of the year in the fall. So I'm wondering how much less, and our original legislation had a ton of exemptions. So I'm just wondering, like, what your thoughts are when you say least restrictive. I hear what you're saying and I understand, and I know that we've heard a lot of pushback from the community. So I respect that in terms of, you know, we don't want this to be something that we're shoving down people's throats and that's going to create this uproar in Rye Brook. I get that. I also recognize that, you know, the homeowners associations will, you know, often, regardless of what you're trying to do to get them to change, will be resistant, or residents are often resistant. So I understand that there's that balance, but I'm just curious, like, when you say least restrictive, what that means to you. I would just like to understand that from both of you, because you both used it, and I want to just understand better what your thinking is or what that means.
Sure. Well, for me, I was thinking that first there shouldn't be any exemptions. Okay. And my second issue is that as well, as far as least restrictive, I mean, for, you know, if a person, for me, if you wanted to, for gas and electric, I don't know if I would have it May through September 30th. I might be more comfortable if maybe there was like hours of when it couldn't be used, because I noticed that in the community, the big issue was the people who were working from home and the noise. I know that in Bedford, they have a noise ordinance. So what it is that they can have a leaf blower, but it can only be of so many decibels. For me, I'm thinking maybe that's something where, you know, the community could say, okay, well, you know, this is how much, you know, for decibels, this is how much it would be. So, I mean, for me, I was thinking maybe if it was more like a noise ordinance, or another idea I had was, again, and this is for mostly for people who are working from home, because I heard it a lot that, you know, man, the noise is this really, it's a lot. You know, I hear like 3 leaf blowers at the same time. I hear it multiple days during the week. Perhaps if we could have like certain parts of the community and days, like there couldn't be a leaf blower used, you know, or it could only be electric, so it's quieter. Maybe that would be another thing that I think would be interesting. But those were kind of my ideas when I was thinking of something that was least restrictive.
I do want to mention, to your point about the decibel noise, I believe Mamaroneck has something along those lines too. And one thing they did now reading on their website is, I believe sometimes it can be even more restrictive, the decibels, because it said that in their noise restriction there, I think there were only like 3 different kinds of electric blowers that would be allowed. So it actually restricts all gas then, and like a good chunk of electric too, because they're considered too loud. But of course we could do a, higher decibel if we had wanted to, but just, they have something similar to that. So.
And Debbie, I also would piggyback on what Brandy said earlier in terms of 2 things, the support from the community and the ability to enforce. So it did seem overwhelmingly at first at the public meeting that all of the research we did and all the work we did was not appreciated. And it did feel like there was an outpouring of what are you recommending here? But that's not necessarily true. And I see Mrs. Stone is on the email at the Zoom here. And it made me feel so good at the end of the meeting that people were coming up who hadn't planned on speaking, who really didn't think this was going to be an issue. It was like maybe the silent majority are very much in favor of this. And it can be, I'm a former Blind Brook teacher, and I'm thicker skinned than most because I know what it's like to be criticized by a few people that are scary, and then you just shut up. But we know we're doing the right thing. We know we're speaking from a point of having done a lot of education ourselves on the issue. And we don't really know how the community feels. We know how those 50 people feel coming out to the meeting, but we really, really don't know what kind of support the community would have. Even within the HOAs. It's by the way, someone said an HMO. I don't think we're talking about our healthcare system, but I do think that a friend of mine had told me that Largemont did a lot of community outreach. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think we're in a position, and I've been on this committee a really, really long time, and we have been talking about this for at least 5 years. And I shudder at the thought of talking about it anymore. But I do think we need not just a community outreach into Largemont and all of the other communities. I think we need a community outreach right here. Because again, what you said, Brandy, made such sense to me that if we knew what kind of support we really had within the community, we would know how enforceable this was. So that's what I meant by not restrictive. The perception that 6 of us, and the committee is bigger than 6, but the perception that there's just a few of us in the community coming out with this restrictive, oppressive, a piling up of leave law is just not true. It's one of the things that we've been asked to explore, and I just think that I don't know how everyone feels, but I do know how easy it is to be intimidated, and I would hate to think as a committee that we'd be giving up because of a few scary voices. But that's mine.
When you both said, I'm hearing different things now from what I interpreted you're saying in terms of, least restrictive, because my thinking was that you don't really want to move forward with very much legislation. And now your comments are kind of not expressing that same to me. I'm trying to understand. I think as a committee, we potentially have the responsibility along with our, the village to do that education. And I know we've done a lot of research and I've seen a lot in writing. Again, I just think that our case would be much stronger if we could say Larchmont did it and it was effective and it was really great for the community and people rallied around it. And Bedford did it and it was successful and this is why. I just feel like that would be a better case for us. I agree, we don't really know how our community feels about it. And I do know when I listened, at the meeting last week, was it only last week, 2 weeks ago, whenever it was, most people actually did say, we're moving in this direction. We know we're going to have to do something. We know that. And then they each took their own individual personal circumstances and said, but I work at home during the day, so I don't want it during the daytime. Or I want to be able to enjoy my pool on the weekends. I don't want it on the weekends. And I don't, so legislation, we can never get it so that it's going to make everybody happy in terms of that, which is why I thought we should be consistent with the noise ordinance that's already in place in Rye Brook and consistent with those times and those hours, because that's already in place, it's already established, and we can be consistent across the board with noise. But I think a lot of people really, when you listen underneath, they were supportive of, yes, we know we're going to have to do something, but then they started thinking about how it might inconvenience them or affect their property. And I think that's our education opportunity to say your yard is going to actually look better if you transition toward mulching and toward doing these.
But then we're going to
things that are
have
more
to prove it. Then we have to prove it. It's
We
not
have
enough just
Crawford Park,
say
right?
it.
That's doing some of this already. I think they're maybe a good example. I do have some
Who's that?
material saved as far as education from the other towns that I can share, like that they've sent out to their residents for like their education.
Mhm.
But right, and
So I
and
can
if we
share
can
that
hear
with everybody.
again, yeah, because that's where, I think that if we can hear from these communities how it really has worked there. And, I'm sure we're not the only community that's hearing resistance. I'm sure they all had resistance at the beginning.
Right.
But it really be beneficial, and some of them have had it in place and they are similar. There's enough communities out there in Westchester that have enacted something that I just think that would go a long way toward at this next meeting, at the public hearing, being able to, maybe, and it can be emails, maybe they write back an email. We ask them those questions. What were the pitfalls? What did you face when you were, enacting the legislation, and what have you seen since? And if that supports our position, we can, first of all, use it to influence whatever our recommendation is, but we can then present that, at the next public hearing, as we want to give you more information about what other communities here locally similar to us have done, and how their residents have really embraced this, if in fact that's happened. And their landscapers have embraced this.
But it would also, for me, be a little helpful to know where the mayor and the trustees are weighing in on this so far. Because I almost fell through the floor when it was thrown back, Jason, into our laps again, because we have really researched, we have really worked on it. We know this is the right thing to do, and they're going to make, yes, you're raising your hand. Look how nice. And I do think that we need to have some feedback also.
I did feel like when I was looking though on Facebook on the Rye Brook residents page, I did like reading to see how the community felt. And a lot of it, from what I could tell, was, Rye Brook is special. Rye Brook is different than other parts of Westchester. It's kind of like people live in Queens. They don't live in Queens. They live in Astoria. They live in Jackson Heights, kind of a thing. And also kind of this very kind of American, traditionally American, well, it's my property. I can do whatever I want to on my property. How dare you tell me how I'm going to, live my life? And, words like, lifestyle choices. And for me, I just felt that if we had something that was less restrictive, again, something that in just looking at the comments, there were a lot of comments on the Facebook. There were also a lot of comments that were sent to Greg, of where people were. And I was surprised that there were people that were supportive of the legislation. It was just in different ways. And I think it'd be important to look at that and really tailor something that really reflects what the community wants. Because when I went to the public meeting, like what Robin said, there were a lot of people that voiced their opposition to it. And she's right, there are some very good public speakers in our community. There were some people, that they wanted to speak, but they didn't because, maybe they didn't have the public speaking skills. I mean, especially when Joan and Paul, our former mayors spoke. I mean, I was really impressed. I was thinking, man, do they do like Dale Carnegie or Toastmasters on the side? But, but I think though that if we look at what the community has said thus far, I think that would be helpful for us to be able to tailor something, and it seems to be noise is a big issue for the most part. So, I mean, if there was some way for us to be able to tailor this so that the noise component was alleviated, I think that would be helpful. I think the environmental stuff, it's beneficial, obviously, but I think maybe that comes later. Okay, just because I'm just looking to see what the community wants, or they think they need, and that seems to be the big issue that I saw when I was reading the comments. I'm not sure how anybody else saw it when they were looking at the comments.
I'm just going to jump in myself. So I did send you guys an email, which I should have sent you guys, and I apologize for this a lot sooner, because I called all of our neighboring municipalities I can get a hold of, and the ones I did speak to, like the town of Mamaroneck or in the village of Mamaroneck and city of Rye, a lot of what I know this has been said over and over again in terms of the restrictions and or even the time periods are very similar to what we propose to neighboring communities. So what I mean by this, guys, is that you guys, by putting this together, it's not anything earth-shattering here. So is this something that over time that we can adapt even from a municipal operational standpoint in terms of us? Of course. Now, as Robin said, again, we have done as research, have held hearings, of contacting. I've done stuff, Maya and Chris, that we haven't told you guys about. Just from my perspective, in terms of the position that I'm in terms of it's been just trying to balance between how do the landscapers feel about it, how do the residents feel about it, how do you guys feel about it, how does our police department feel about it, how does our highway personnel feel about it, and coming up with what we have before us right now, and not counting anything else we might change, that was a culmination of all of that. And if I'm just going to be really frank and honest, that a lot of the residents, they don't really think. Some of them didn't even read exactly what was in it, don't really understand it as it was. I mean, again, maybe we can do better public outreach. Again, we had residents that came here tonight, and as I told Chris this when we had the public hearing, I mean, typically the public hearing, we get nobody. So was I appreciative to have that comments? Actually, yes. So we can also try to address some what the concerns are. But some of the comments that I've read and some of the comments that made the public hearing, if they actually read through it, you see some of the comments that were made that addresses their concern already. Now, I know I've told you guys this before, and I will reiterate it every time I'm with you, is that just keep in mind, no matter what this committee puts together, so it's going to upset somebody. Now, I wish there was a solution. Like Vito said, we can make everybody happy, but that's impossible. So, like I said, I'm not the policymaker, and Chris isn't. And like I said, I like to stay out of these in terms of policy discussions as much as I can. But again, of course, I weigh in when I have to. And this is the time when I do need to weigh in terms of, I just don't want you guys to feel like that you guys didn't put in the effort no matter what some residents may have said, because you guys have. Now, I've only been here a year now. It's not my understanding that you guys have been working on this for quite some time now, probably a few years. So I don't blame you guys for being a little bit tired. I know that on my end for the past year, as fun as this has been, I'm sure that all of us are more tired than any of the residents in Rye Brook, whether it be HOAs or landscapers are tired about talking about this. And there we have 8 active committee members now in terms of all the work that you guys have put in. And to be quite honest, I don't think it's really been appreciated by some of the residents. Now, again, you can disagree, it's fine. Again, everyone's gonna have their own opinions on this law. But I know I've certainly not, and I'm gonna make sure that, at least in terms of once this is passed, that at least the public doesn't lose sight of the fact that why we're doing this. Again, I don't think they have to be sacrificed, because my own personal view is that one doesn't have to be sacrificed for the other in terms of noise and emissions. I think they can go hand in hand. Now, some people may value one or another, and that's totally okay. So what we do have right now is in terms of leaf blowers, it connects to our noise ordinance. So that applies to all equipment, including leaf blowers. So I know Brandon, you mentioned that before. So we do have something on the books that currently like that, but just nothing specific to any piece of equipment. And this is just starting small too. I mean, some people have mentioned, why don't we do lawnmowers? I mean, but again, the whole point of this isn't to cause a burden on anybody. This is, as I was speaking about it with Chris after a public hearing, it's a pro-environmental sustainable initiative designed to accomplish a couple of different goals at once. Now, I'm not an environmental expert, and to be quite honest with you guys, before I was given this task by the mayor and Chris, I knew virtually nothing about this. Now I've grown a lot myself in the past year by just doing all this with you guys, and I'm thankful for that. But either way, and when all this is said and done, is that you're gonna have some people that's gonna be very happy and some people that are gonna be upset. And just be straight honest with you guys, there's nothing you can do about that. You're muted, Michael.
Michael,
Michael, you're still muted.
I'm sorry, to make an obvious point, in terms of people being happy or unhappy, we're not lawmakers. We're just an advisory committee. Not one thing we do has to be accepted. It's ultimately the attorney and the board that makes the decision. So bluntly, I don't think we have to take the pulse of the community if we don't want to. I don't think that we have to, among ourselves, necessarily reflect the views of the entire community. We have to make recommendations that make sense to us and believe are the right thing to do within the confines of the committee. And then ultimately, whatever is said at the public hearing, whatever is accepted or unaccepted, that's the board's responsibility.
that's a good point.
So I don't know that we have to tie ourselves in knots. Again, I agree. It'd be very good to know, and I agree with Debbie, what happens in other communities and what's worked and what doesn't work. But again, I think that goes to informing us to make what we believe is the best recommendation possible. That'll either get accepted or not. We'll either get overwhelmed by people with contrary opinions or not, but that's.
And in a way, Michael, we did that.
Right.
We
But
did
again,
it already.
Right, but we heard, at least on my, speaking just myself, I heard comments and some of them have resonated with me on the exemptions and other stuff, so makes sense to take another round, but yeah, in terms of what people appreciate, don't appreciate, like or don't like, ultimately, that's not on our heads. That's not with us.
The mayor wants to.
And
make a comment.
Jason
The other
wants
thing to remember,
Would you like to say
the
something?
thing to remember is that the 6 people in the room is not us making the decision. Our elected officials are elected to make decisions for the community.
exactly.
They're elected to do, to be representative of the community. And so, you know, that argument that several people made of, you don't have a right to tell me what to do, kind of goes out the window. That's kind of what government does, is they are elected to serve the people. And, certainly they need to be represented, but they're representative of the entire community, just not only the people who come out with one point of view. So anyway,
Mr.
but
Mayor,
Michael, I agree with you too, to bring us back.
Jason?
Sorry, I would just say I agree with the comments that are being made right now, that this was a report and recommendation asked for from the Sustainability Committee. And I listened to this entire thing. I'm very happy to hear all of the comments from the public and from the committee members alike. And really what we're looking for are those recommendations. And whether we take them to heed or not, that is the responsibility of the Board of Trustees. That's what we were elected to do, is to look at all the information presented to us and make what we believe is the best decision for the community
Exactly.
and for Rye Brook as a whole. And I really appreciate all this conversation, all this discussion, because it does speak to how importantly we take this, that this is something that does affect community members, and that's important. And so it's important that we have this discussion, and I really appreciate all the effort that all of you have given this. And I look forward to seeing your report and recommendations. And if we don't take all of it into account, I apologize. But we will discuss it as a board, as we were elected to do, and hopefully pass legislation that is acceptable and for the betterment of the community. So thank you for your time on this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Jason.
Kehoe, I think you have your hand raised.
Yes, I just wanted to say, I think that there is a real danger for us of greenwashing, in terms of if we keep weakening and taking everyone's feedback and chipping away slowly by slowly. All right, let's not start May 1st, let's not start June, let's introduce time restrictions, and we keep chipping away at what was really not a revolutionary piece of legislation. We are not trailblazers here. I do feel like there is a serious danger of us chipping away to the point where there's almost nothing left. And I think we have to have some courage and sort of stick to our guns, keep our recommendations about people's health, the environment. There are a few things like I don't think we have to have penalties the first year. We could have that type of phase in. I do agree about getting rid of the exemptions and leading by example. Those sort of changes I definitely can agree with, but in terms of just chipping away till there's almost no environmental impact of our legislation, I think there's just a real danger in that.
Thank you, Shio. I think we have a member of the community that has their hand raised. If you wanted to speak, hi.
Hi. Yes, this is Yolanda Stone. And I just wanted to thank the committee, because I was actually one of the few people that did speak at the public hearing in favor of the legislation. And I think I said it then, I was really shocked at the amount of opposition, and that it felt like there was nobody there in favor, very few people in favor of it. And some very loud voices stating their opposition, some of which the same of which I heard tonight as well, some of the same people I saw. But I did want to just really thank the committee, and just to let you know that it is really truly appreciated, not just by me, but others as well. It was really funny, because after the meeting, several days after, I was actually quoted in the Westmore News article, and I hadn't seen it, but several friends sent me the clip, the quote, and and I was laughing. I was like, well, I was probably one of the few that spoke, and people thanked me for doing that. People that weren't there, obviously, they thanked me for saying something, because they felt the same way. And it's just, either they didn't know about the meeting, or they couldn't be at the meeting, or they really, even if they were at the meeting, wouldn't have don't like public speaking, as most people, honestly, most people really don't. I mean, I don't either. But, so I do think that there is a large majority that is also in favor and that really appreciates this, this type of legislation. And, that being said, I do think, it was stated at the meeting, and, I do also want to reiterate the fact that I think that, when people hear a ban, there's always going to be, voices, up in arms about it. And I think that it's really difficult to tell people not that they can't do something, especially without giving them a viable alternative. And I think that that's really where the education piece, and I'm glad that that's been mentioned here tonight, because that's what I really wanted to state, is I think that it's important to, we are by far one of the first communities doing this in Westchester. When I saw the list, I was shocked at, there's so many towns that have already done this and have been doing it for quite some time. I mean, several years now. So I think, really hearing how other communities have been doing this successfully, because I'm hearing a lot, at the public hearing and again tonight, the same voices saying the same thing, that the technology is not there, it just can't be done. I'm hearing a lot of that. And I don't know, I'm not a landscaper. I know that, my landscaper has been doing it successfully, fairly new to them as well as they move in this direction. But, all these other towns have been doing it for quite some time, and not with, they weren't really even faced with the same opposition that we've been, in a lot of times, like just looking at what the other towns were doing in their public hearings, there were more people speaking in favor of the legislation than not. So, I do think it's important to see how other people have done this successfully, and, hear from landscapers that have been doing it successfully. I think that's important. And just really educating people on giving them viable alternatives, because, just telling them they can't do it, and, that's really difficult, and it's a hard pill to swallow too. So, I guess I'm not as surprised at the opposition, in that sense. So, if we could just provide more alternatives, I think that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments that we?
I want to thank you for speaking, and just, as you're out and about, and for all of us, as we're out and about, if we do know people who are also supportive, it would be helpful if they would submit comments. They don't have to speak at a public hearing. They can submit their comments in writing, but, that would be helpful as the trustees are going to go through and discuss this and debate and figure out where they're coming out finally on this legislation. The voices are heard. The more voices they hear from, the more of an understanding that they have. And, so if there are people like you out there who heard and were surprised, just encourage them. It doesn't take a lot. It can be 2 sentences or 3 sentences. But, if they are in support and they think it's a great thing for our community, it would be helpful for the trustees to have their voices represented as well as they're going through this final process.
Sorry, I was muted. It's going to go on as an old business item. So our next meeting on Tuesday, the trustees are going to discuss it as well. It's not a public hearing, but it's just something that they're going to discuss as a follow-up to last Tuesday and tonight. But again, just to give you also a recap, so again, it is April 11th. So if any revisions other than what we have before us, with the exception of changing electric, because that's, I think, already been settled at this point. we just have to be at least within a couple weeks before the 11th, because again, I would have to notice it to like the paper and everything. So my question to you guys is, do you think that's possible for everyone to kind of sort this out within the next couple of weeks in time, or do you guys think you would need in addition? And this is all like hypothetical, so I'm not like trying to get like pin an answer from you guys. But do you think you would need more, maybe potentially, if the board agrees with this, push it to like the second meeting in April?
I'm just going to speak for myself. I wouldn't be opposed to pushing it back a little bit, just to give us a little more time to not feel so rushed. I think we want to make sure that this is the last time we have to revise it, hopefully. Yeah, so I'd like to take our time if we can to get all that information that we're talking about and making sure that everything is right.
Can I just ask Jason, if you're still here, again, it's a hypothetical situation with just your perspective as a mayor, would that be something that you personally, because I know you can't speak on behalf of yourself, be willing to grant potentially if need be?
Considering that the budget is being presented on April 11th, I'd say I'd be okay pushing it 2 weeks later. So,
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point too.
and by the way, everyone's welcome to attend the budget hearing as well.
I actually, please do, because like I said, we usually get nobody. So actually, please come to the budget hearing so we can have somebody come.
So this would be April 25th then potentially?
It would be the 25th if we pushed it back a meeting. I guess the report and recommendation then would have to be in at least 2 weeks prior. We have to notice the meeting, but I'd like to have it on a discussion item prior to the meeting heading into that.
Yeah.
So if we could have the report and recommendation by the end of March, then we would, do you think that's possible? Because then we would put it on a public hearing for the second meeting in April.
I think it's possible. Yeah. And then, yeah, I think that would be possible for us to do that.
And just
And
let
if we
everyone,
had
just so you guys
to-
know, based on the calendar, so the first Thursday in April is April 6th.
Okay.
Greg, does that give us time to notice if we get the report and recommendation and have it as discussion prior? I'd rather have it as discussion prior. So I think if we can get it in by the end of March, to then have it as a discussion item on the first meeting in April, to then be on as public hearing for second meeting in April.
Be easy if we just gave you the same thing. Make your edits as you see fit.
I think maybe the potential issue with that is that the community then sees that as what they're voting on. So we don't, I guess.
Well, no, I would just say we're waiting on a report and recommendation from the Sustainability Committee to then have a discussion as village board of how we'd like to see the legislation modified. So that whatever is put on as public hearing is the modified legislation.
So in other words, you could take, let's just say theoretically, because Michael Siegel, you kind of convinced me to think a little bit differently. Well done. But if we took basically what we gave you, let's just say, Jason, and had a discussion, you could modify it before it went public.
I think that's actually what we're
you're
looking
thinking?
for is the report and recommend the recommendation. So we had proposed the legislation that we had a public hearing on. And then we referred it back to Sustainability Committee in order to have recommendations on how that may be changed. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that's how it will be changed, but that's the Sustainability Committee recommendation on the legislation. And so then we as a board have a discussion on what we recommend for the next public hearing.
Because I think.
Does that make sense?
I think this committee in the recommended legislation were saying it the way this committee really thought it should be. And what we basically are now being asked to do is provide legislation light.
No, I don't think it's legislation light. I think we had to have, so in order to have the year-round electric allowed, it was gonna have to be a second public hearing no matter what.
Correct, yes.
Right.
And so I think based on community comment, and it could be that the Sustainability Committee recommends no change. That could be a recommendation. But then it's down to village board to decide what we want the next public hearing to, what legislation we want the next public hearing to be based upon.
Exactly, which is why I think all of we would be doing, and committee members, tell me if I'm interpreting it wrong, but from everything I heard at the meeting, everything I've heard tonight is we need to figure out what we're willing to let go.
I would adjust that
will
by
say one
saying
thing
what you're
as
willing
far
to
as-
recommend.
And I will say some of these things we actually do potentially want to let go of, like the exemptions. That's something that I think we all were sort of in agreement that that would actually be a good thing, and on our side and on the community side, that they agree.
Which is
that they didn't want
really
exemptions either.
being more restrictive, if you think about it, not less, more. So that means the community wants to include more people on the legislation, not less.
And that was the good thing about getting their input, is that we thought that they would want the exemptions because that's what the other municipalities have done. But we found out that actually a lot of them said we'd prefer you don't have the exemptions. So it's good because that's something that as a committee, I think a lot of us would maybe agree that we would prefer to also.
But I just don't think we should reinvent.
That work.
I just don't think we should reinvent the wheel. I think there's minor tweaks that we could recommend based on all the discussions, and hand it back to Jason and the rest of the trustees. They could figure out a lot of the details that are palatable to the community or not. You know, I am kind of, it's very frustrating because we've gone round and round, and I do believe the legislation was the right thing in the first place, except for the exemptions. But I didn't know about the exemptions, to be honest, except for the school.
Like a lot
So
of
I didn't know. As far as I was concerned, everybody had to do it.
a lot of the hiccup, and to also keep in mind, was originally about not allowing electric. So that should solve, or that one, I wouldn't want to say solve, that's a bad choice of
That's
word.
that's up to the trustees.
Yeah, and no, but what I'm saying is that from both the committee's perspective and the trustees' perspective, as well as from the village perspective, is that allowing electric, I think, went a long way to easing a lot of residents.
Some.
At least in terms of based on a lot of the comments that I received myself from emails, and as well as through the public hearing. And again, that's a tweak. The reason I'm bringing that, that's a tweak that we're already agreeing to make.
Great. So there's a couple of tweaks. I don't think we need to make more changes in that. That's really up to the mayor, the trustees, to take the recommendations. And in some ways, we're making them more widespread by getting rid of some exemptions. And in some ways, we're giving up some things by saying electric is okay in the summer months. So as far as I'm concerned, done.
So why don't, my suggestion is maybe before I type out all the other things that we could vote on, maybe we do a vote on if we want to change those things at all. And
That's, I was just gonna say that.
no, and then we can go forward. If we want to go forward, I will then put the other things up and we can vote on each of those things. But the first one can be, do we want to vote on them at all?
But I was just about
Sorry.
to recommend that. That's maybe something we should do actually tonight. That way we actually know at least some of them, just so we know where everybody stands. What I mean, like you guys could just report and recommendation.
Right, but what I don't want to lose if we can do this is again, go back to the point that was made and a point that Debbie reiterated, which is to the extent that we can get input from other communities that have the law.
Just to solve the issue, that particular issue. Again, because I agree that, because I definitely, unfortunately, we couldn't, I've actually been communicating about this with Bridget for the last couple of weeks, but unfortunately, it just couldn't happen tonight. And I believe I did mention this too, and Jason, since you're on here too, as well, I'm gonna send all of you, as well as the board, invites to Ashley's landscaper, who she connected me with. Again, he's at a conference this week, so again, I really couldn't get him here for Thursday. Right now, that I'm looking at is Tuesday. It'll be during the day to Zoom. Now, again, it's, you know, nobody has to come, but it's just an extra learning opportunity for us to see how in a landscaper who was switched mostly over to electric, how he's dealt with a lot of the concerns that many of the landscapers that we've heard from have brought up regarding having to pass on costs or technology, et cetera. So I think that's going to be hugely helpful, as we'll be hearing from the communities that have done this already. But I do think it's worth, at least before we wrap up tonight, as Bridget said, to agree to at least discuss, okay, just so there's no confusion and everybody knows where each other stands. Now, again, if you want to change anything, that's totally okay too. And then, of course, we'll follow with Ashley and Frank through emails, although they both did provide comments to all of us in terms of where they stand on some of these issues. But at least just for tonight, and also that way the mayor can also hear where you guys stand on some of this, because that would also make, I think Jason can step in if I'm speaking out of tune on their behalf, but I think that will make, when they get the report recommendation, you guys, that'll make it easier for them. They know at least where you guys stand on some of these different things. So I'll just throw one out there. And again, I'm just choosing at random. I'm not like picking anything by design. So the idea of, okay, let's, in terms of our municipal operations, some have said that we shouldn't get it, some have said that we should. Now, I have specified myself, and this is where I will step in, because again, as being a village official, why we should get it and what we are doing. But again, I mean, you guys can report differently to the board, and then of course the board will make up their own decision. Now, be clear with this is that the board definitely values what, and certainly Chris and I, from the administration perspective, we definitely value any board recommendations you have. So I'll just start with that, just to start with one. So how does everybody feel with that? I did send you the memo that Chris put together. Again, we've discussed this several times, but just so we know where everybody stands.
Is it a yes or no question?
Yeah, pretty much. It's a yes or no in terms of how do you guys feel about that?
So yes, we want the village to be exempt. No, we don't want them to be exempt.
But yes.
So I vote no, I don't want them exempt.
Okay.
No, I do not want them exempt.
Also a no, don't want them exempt.
I'm in favor of the exemption.
I don't want the exemption.
Like I said, and that's totally fine. And the board obviously will make up their own decision on terms of that exemption, but at least in terms of know where you guys stand. Now,
But Shio, I don't think we heard Shio's vote.
I didn't hear from everybody.
Oh, sorry, I'm a no. I don't
Okay,
think
so I
that.
think we have 5 as no and 1 is yes so far. Okay. And I think we got everyone that's here on this, and we can get an email.
yeah, again, and the reason why I've said that from the
Now-
beginning, I said that because I've spoken, and like I said, I've tried to do everything I can on my end, paying to all the different stakeholders to try to get everyone's view and take on this. And as I specified,
Oh, no, just that you can understand, perhaps from I'm speaking for myself, but maybe for the other committee members that voted the same way. It's not for lack of understanding what the village's needs are and the constraints that they have on them. I just think that, and perhaps the others agree with me, that setting a standard for other people in the community and saying this applies to you, but we have challenges, so we can't do the same thing, is really hard to swallow. And I think that I honestly feel that if the trustees were going to come out with legislation, that said, you guys all have to do this, and the, you know, HOAs have to do it, and the golf courses, everybody else has to do it, but we don't, I really, really think that would be problematic for our community. And I think that every argument that you bring up about why it is a challenge for the village to implement this is the same argument that a landscape or possibly even an might bring up, and a homeowner association. They all have the same challenges. And so I understand that you're speaking from the employee's point of view and the village's point of view, and respectfully, I respect that. I just think that as a committee, you know, I think what you're hearing, I just want to understand why you're hearing the other point of view.
No, and
And
that's why
not because we're not supportive of the village and what the village is doing. It's because it's a challenge to say, you know, we're going to require everybody to do it but us. I just don't think that's a good look. And I would honestly hate to see the legislators do that, our trustees do that. I don't know that they would. And they're going to, you know, also they work with the village. They understand all of those needs. But I think
Yeah,
that's a
I'm
real
not saying
challenge.
that it's not necessarily, because I've said it before too. I can understand why just from a human level. But I'm going to say this, and because again, I think I would like to be honest, everyone, is that respectfully, the challenges are not the same. Because as I said, and I'm not saying that you guys are wrong with feeling the way you guys feel. I'm just speaking as honest and truthfully as I can, is that from a landscapers or residents, that they don't have to maintain public roads. That takes them away. They don't have to maintain public parks. Landscapers don't have to do that. And just sitting down with them, and we told them, look, why is that you guys need the exemption? Because even from Chris and I's perspective, you know, we need justification from them as well, in order to even say why they feel they should get it in the first place. Now, listening to them is that, look, that we told them one way or another is that you guys have to start using electric, because again, I feel personally is that as well as you guys have stated, that we can't tell the residents and landscapers they have to start transitioning if we're not willing to do it ourselves as well in some capacity. And they understand that. But also, as I said, that a lot of the challenges are not similar, is that when we have incidents at parks or roads, like grinding the roads or paving them. Now, just to give you as an example, like Pine Ridge Park, that can take a day and a half, like to clean, because again, they do them every weekend, and I think as well as Rye Hill's the one.
We understand, Rick. I think it's going to be up to the trustees.
And it will. I'm just trying to.
And we're missing members tonight, so they might vote a different way.
I mean,
But you know, the sustainability committee is making their recommendation. The trustees are going to decide what they think is best for the village. So the decision is in their hands. We're not making a decision.
Because again, I wanted to hear what your concerns are, but I'm just giving it from as why the challenges are not similar. But we can move on. We can move on from that one. And I told the landscapers that too. Is that, like, I don't think you guys have an easy job, because you guys don't have an easy job at all. But again, landscapers are not going to have to worry about if you have a water main break or if a storm's happening and the roads have to be salted, and all those other matters that come with being a highway.
But the legislation can be drafted in such a way that the village has the opportunity to with storms or with extenuating circumstances, to use leaf blowers. They have the opportunity to draft legislation that way as an exception in the case of some type of storm.
It's not just necessarily a case of storm, because that's already in the legislation that the superintendent of public works has that, and that's actually pretty much a carbon copy from Rye, because Rye also same thing, the superintendent of public works can issue it. And I spoke to him about that. And he understands that like, you will have that responsibility in order to, if there's a storm and for 7 days, and you can continue to extend it as necessary. So in terms of golf club, now we only have like one golf club, which is Blind Brook, and the membership clubs. And honestly, you can kind of combine those, because unless anyone can tell me differently, I don't know of any of the membership clubs other than Blind Brook. Membership/golf clubs.
But one thing I will say is, although we only have that one currently, there is land that could potentially be used as that in the future, because I know we have a couple that are currently not in use, but they do exist, right? Like we have the, I'm not sure of the names, I'm sorry, but I know where they are. And they're golf clubs that are now closed, right? So they're not currently being maintained, but that could change. I mean, if somebody were to buy it, so I'm assuming.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only one that we have operational now. Now, they told us what they're gonna, and again, and one of the reasons why, again, just rehashing why we gave some of those exemptions is to, again, try to be fair to the landscapers. It's like some of the bigger commercial properties, it just wouldn't, it's more difficult for them to get those tasks done. I mean, Blind Brook has their own maintenance staff. But most of the commercial properties are going to use landscapers but that they contract with, be it Rye Brook or anywhere else. I mean, I can't speak to what each one of them are doing, of course, but I know at least Bryan Brook, they have the maintenance staff that they use.
But again, we're a committee making a recommendation, and I would think it would be up to the trustees to take our recommendation or not and explain to the community why they make the decisions they do or not. I think I've kind of come full circle during this meeting, realizing we have a job to do. And our job is to recommend what we believe is the best environmental decision for the community. I think that's what the trustees want us to do. And then they have some very tough political decisions to make. And I say I am very confident that they could make it.
But
Look,
just for our
and
perspective,
again, I want to remind people that lived here a long time, it does matter to me what you do on your property. Hillendale, I live right near there. The mercury that was buried underground, my kids had to walk through it, take their shoes off. I practically had to hose them down when they came into the house. There was a fire down in Deer Run. Someone was storing some kind of business tanks in their house. It does matter what your neighbors do. It might be your property, but it's our air. It's our groundwater. So again, I think you've all convinced me, and I appreciate this, to stop thinking so politically, start thinking environmentally, make our recommendations, and allow the trustees to have the best of our recommendations. When they take a look at it from a political standpoint, there's going to be huge compromises. Of course there are, but at least we'll know we did our best.
as Trustee Heiser said,
Very well said, Robin. Good job.
remember as
Yeah,
what
you
Trustee
explained
Heiser
it very
said
well.
regarding, for those of you who were there, Trustee Heiser,
Led by Michael.
I think very eloquently gave the example of speed limits.
Yeah.
In terms of, again, how that impacts. Now, again, I couldn't agree more personally, but again, the reason we're again just going through this is just so that way at least when we again, because something has to be presented either way. Just so at least we have that paper, then the trustees, or that paper, and we have that, so then the trustees can do what they want with it. And again, we're not gonna resolve all this tonight, because obviously I don't think that anyone wants to be here until like 11 o'clock at night, even going through this whole list that we have. But just so we can at least just start getting who we have here and then who is not here, at least just thinking about these things and how they want to recommend it for the trustees. And then of course the trustees can take the decisions that they're going to make with it.
Do we want to vote on something next? Is there something in mind that you have?
I'm just looking at random. So like the retirement communities, we have 2 within the village. We have 8.
We could, you know what, just to save a little time, we could have like a little checklist for everyone on an email that could list the places that are exempted, and people can check if they have like certain places should absolutely be exempted and some places no. And then we don't have to go through everything.
But
The
the-
one thing I think
Can I
we
make a
should-
recommend?
I think
Can I
the
make a
one thing we should
recommendation?
though talk about, just as a quick vote as a committee, maybe not tonight, the electric in the summer, and I think we need to decide as a committee, do we say to stick with that? And that is giving up something, or do we agree that it's fine to have electric in the summer? So those kind of things, I think as a committee, we could decide whether we recommend it or not. But on each and every of the exemptions, people might have all different ideas for what should or
I
shouldn't.
just, as far as the exemptions go, so talking about that, the opportunity, we don't, the village doesn't have rules. They have oversight house in the village. We just get a feel for what the committee members feel in terms of, do we have any exemptions? Or do we want to start picking and choosing exemptions? Because if we've determined that we don't think anybody should be exempt, except for the schools that we don't have oversight over, then we don't have to go through that detail down
Right.
the road.
Yeah, so we could vote
Right.
on that right now if we just wanted to gauge and see. And of course, like you said, we do have a few members and it seemed that they could submit their vote via email afterwards.
Yeah.
Did we want to, Greg, did you want to ask that, or should we move forward with a vote on that?
Again, that's
Okay.
that's you guys want to do that. That's your-
So I'll start. I'm saying I want no exemptions. That's my vote.
No exemptions.
No exemptions.
No exemptions.
Yeah, again, no exemptions other than the first municipal one.
Okay.
That was already voted down.
Shio, did you already vote?
No exemptions.
Okay, so all of us agreed, and then Michael, you just had the one caveat that you wanted the village to be exempt.
Now, since we've done that, in terms of electric versus gas. Now, again, you guys can vote as you please. Now, I think the trustees themselves, including the mayor, have made it pretty clear in terms of, again, how they stand on that particular issue. But again, that doesn't change how you guys can do it right then, here and now.
Can we also do a vote just quickly, as Robin mentioned, just so we get the committee's full vote on this as yes or no for the electric being allowable throughout the times that we had previously banned it, which is pretty much over the summer. My vote is yes.
Yes, for
Yes.
electric in the summer.
Okay,
Yes, to allow electric.
okay.
Yes, to allow electric.
I'm also going to say yes to allow electric, but I do want to hear everybody's perspective of whether we become more restrictive on the other side and have a phase in at some point in time where there is no gas anymore and it's only electric all year long.
Okay.
Yes on the ban on electric.
Okay.
I mean, I'm sorry. I agree with everyone.
Yes,
Sorry.
yes,
We
to
would
allowing
allow.
electric. Yeah, okay. So we have all 6 of the current members in agreement that we want to allow, recommend to allow electric throughout the year. Okay. Is there anything else that we can think of really quickly that we would want to vote on? Or do we want to move forward with the rest via email?
Let me just double check just to make sure there's anything that we can just.
What about penalties and fees for year 1?
Yes, I was actually gonna ask that. So thank you, actually, Shio. So again, just something to think about. Again, just an idea that I have, and again, you can completely agree with it or completely disregard it. But maybe as a way just to help everyone adapt to it, you give like a year grace period, so it takes into effect May of 2024 with no
Can I-
exceptions, but it just gives everyone the year just to catch up to everything and just to acclimate to it.
So something that was suggested before, I believe at the hearing, was that the law doesn't go into effect for a year. And then I'm hearing other people say it's just not enforced for a year. So do we want to discuss, would we want to recommend it not go into effect at a certain time? Or do we want to recommend that it's just not enforced, but it is actually technically in effect? How do we want to
Both.
Again, these are just
Uh,
recommendations.
do? Mhm.
The board the trustees and the mayor can choose, but from an
I think the
environment,
mayor might have commented. So
From an
yeah, so we have
environmental-
so yeah, we can
from-
choose and what we want to recommend if we want
as
to.
a environmental board, as a sustainability board, I would recommend a year of education, a year of warning, and then take it from there. And again, it's up to the mayor and the trustees how, and I do think they are going to be the ones that are going to deal with the fallout of consequences, as well as the police department will deal with the fallout. But I do think that what we could do as a committee is commit to helping with a year, at least a year of education.
Okay.
But again, just to be clarified, so a year in terms of,
I agree.
think it's a great idea. I mean, doing a year of education, and then I think I've said this in the past, but events like the Rye Brook birthday, when we get a table, those are like prime opportunities when you have like a huge section of the village coming out, like to do those type of things.
Yes, and we'll have electric leaf blowers. So if someone comes, and you know who I'm talking about. And
So,
we can have some people demonstrate, maybe we could have things like that. Maybe it is at Crawford Park. Maybe Crawford Park would agree to put out some of
I'm
it.
sure. Robin, can I just ask, when you were saying a year of education, a year of warnings, was that the same year, or were you saying that it wouldn't actually go into effect for 2 years? 2 years. Okay, because I think it could probably be all in the same first year. Legislation would go into effect at a reasonable time after it's signed. You know, it's signed today, and it starts 6 months from now, or whatever that time period is.
And I
to
think that
keep
might
people,
be
let them know the
something-
law is coming.
Right.
And then that first year, but I think recommending that really we're not going to see anything for 2 full years, it makes it kind of sound like,
I have two reasons. I have 2 reasons for that. One, in terms of the education, I don't think that the community really is educated enough about why we particularly pick leaf blowers and why we think the electric leaf blowers are critical in protecting our environment, our air, our noise, etc. 2, I think that we do have to recognize the contractual issues that the HOAs have with these landscapers. And just full disclosure, I live in one of those HOAs, not HMO. So therefore, I can appreciate that it could cause some major sudden expenses that weren't expected. And I want it to work. I want it to be credible. I don't want it to look punitive. I want it to, from our perspective, to look like we are understanding the concerns and we want to address them. And at the same time, we don't want to completely back down in the reason that we have even recommended to go to electric blowers in the first place. But that's why I say a year of education and a year of warnings, which means people are going to start to get those electric equipment as soon as they can, but we wouldn't fine anyone for an entire year. Some people might go out and get it the first year when they hear about the education. They're going to say, this sounds great. I need an electric blower. I doubt it, but it could happen. And then other people are going to know that even if they use their gas blower in the second year, at least they're going to get a warning. But then you were told, Yolanda Stone has said it very well, this isn't anything new. Don't say you didn't know. You had 2 years. At the end of 2 years, if the trustees decide to impose a $250, whatever they decide, fine, you had so much notice. You had so much notice. So that's why I would recommend the year of education, a year of warning, and then fines, whatever they decide after that.
I guess my only thought about that is creating a law that takes so long to go into effect, or recommending, a law. Is it going to be out of date by the time it happens? And also, are we going to frustrate the people, the residents that want this to happen? And then there's still it's like it's not happening for 2 years, and I don't know.
It could happen immediately. You're just giving people the education and you're giving people the flexibility to not have to not only go out and buy new equipment, but to get fined if they don't get it in time.
Yeah, and I agree with Robin. You really, and this was reiterated by many people in the community. They really need time to prepare for this. This was also with the landscapers that, you know, I mean, this affects them directly, is that they do need time to adjust, and having a couple of years, that would probably help too with the technology. Hopefully the technology is more advanced at that time. So, you know, hopefully batteries are charging more quickly, and, you know, electric leaf blowers are safer. I think it's a great idea, Robin.
So then, dude, that would have to apply to everybody then.
Well, yeah.
I think Jason has his hand raised if we want.
Yeah, sorry, I'd also say, you know, again, make a recommendation and then we'll discuss this as village board. So I think if you come up, you know, just even if it's a frame.
Right.
Great.
Perfect. Yeah, I agree in theory, Rob, and I just think 2 years is very long for what Bridget said, because by then something could, you know, technology is changing very quickly. Our environmental, everything's changing very quickly right now with the big push toward green. And I think you lose a little bit of the impetus when you say, yeah, we're going to pass. It's so important that we pass this law. About it for another 2 years. The length is just a little. So in theory, I agree in principle, all those things, but probably, you know, cut it down to a year if it was up to me as a recommendation.
And
just
again,
say,
Ashley,
you know, and
and
again,
Frank
the legislation gets
haven't had
signed
it,
and
so.
gets enacted. You know, the legislation can be signed today and go into effect in 3 months, because you do give people time. You know, often laws don't go into effect right away. So it can go into effect in 3 months. And then for the next year after that, we do the education and the warnings. And so you've got more than a year in total before anybody gets fined.
Well, maybe what we can do, Bridget, when you send out an email, maybe this could be the part where it's almost fill in the blank rather than a multiple choice, or
Yeah,
a
and I
multiple
think
choice. Rather, it's not a yes or no question, because we
but
have.
I think we're split. I think we might, from what I'm hearing, it seems like we might be split on. Most of us are like 1 year or 2 years. It seems like that's sort of more of the split. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's sort of what I'm hearing.
But it's on our recommendation.
And then,
so-
yeah, exactly. So maybe that can be the vote, or if there's another way we want to state it for the vote, let me know. But I can definitely put
Or
that
our
in.
recommendation, going back to what Michael and Robin said in terms of sustainability, our recommendation is that the bill is signed and enacted, and then we give you know, we recommend that there's a period of time before it actually goes into effect, and then that there's another period of time until it's enforced with fines, you know, with just warning before it's enforced, and let the board decide what those timeframes are based on all the other stakeholders that are
I'd be
giving
okay
input.
with that. I would be okay with that, just making a framework, but giving it to the board to make the decision as far as the length.
And also, I would just say, I guess as far as education, since we are putting a little bit of that on us, or at least a lot of that, how long do we think we're going to need for that? Because we wouldn't want them to not give us enough time to educate the public. So if we might want to recommend, you know, a certain time period for the education at least.
I think it's ongoing education, and I think it could be posting on Facebook and putting something together that could be an email that they send out the list, and then 2 months later sending out something else with more information, you know, ongoing, where, you know, we notify the community and give them information about mulching and all of that, like we've already started doing. So I don't necessarily think that that's something that, you know, it doesn't happen all at once. It's all these different touch points of communicating with people throughout the community and in there, you know, whether it's the Rye Brook birthday party, whether it's an email that goes out, whether it's on our Facebook page. I think it's ongoing. And you know what, Rye Brook, not for nothing, it's a pretty small community. So if something changes, people are going to be talking about it. Oh, did you get the email from the village? And they said and we're supposed to, you know, word will spread. They'll figure it out. We're
Yeah.
pretty on top of it. You can see the people that showed up for the public hearing. People are paying attention.
I guess
Some.
one thing we could potentially vote on is, do we want to give a time frame at all, or do we just want to give the framework, as Debbie mentioned? Should we vote on that just to even see if we want to take it further into like a year, 2 years, whatever it is? Because if we're all in agreement that we don't
Why
want
don't,
to,
why don't,
then we
Bridget,
don't
why
do
don't
it.
you just make that a question?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
Why don't we
So,
vote on
let
that?
people
Okay.
answer.
Also, so
I'm
the
not
question
thinking
is-
as clearly anymore.
Yeah, the question is, do we want to give a framework instead of dates? My thought is yes, do the framework, no dates.
Yes, do the dates.
Okay.
One thing I will say, in terms of education, I think that's something that's actually permanent. Because I think that
Ongoing.
as time goes along, that we can always just do certain things, that new technology comes out or new methods of leaf mulching or any other new things that may come up like years from now. So I
Yeah.
don't think education really has to be something that is, okay, a year, this year, that. I think it's something that will just be, I mean, obviously it evolves into different
Yeah.
like objectives of what the education will be, but that's something that's going to be permanent. At least the way when I hear those type of things, the way I look at those things.
Robin, can I get your vote on that?
I'm sorry, I forgot the question.
So it was, do we want to do a framework with no dates? Or do we want to do dates?
I would be fine with giving a recommendation of do education, warning.
Okay, so you're yes on doing a framework. Brandy?
Yeah, I agree with Robin. There should definitely be a framework, with definite dates, and I really do, I know there's some pushback, but we really do need to give the community time to digest this. And I do think that the community, it's not so much about enforcement, because I think this is a law that if it's favorable to the community, it'll be self-enforced.
Okay, Shio?
I don't think we should have penalties for the first year, so I'd rather specify a
Okay,
time
so
frame.
you're same as framework with applied. And then I think Michael, you're the last one.
Right, I think I'm with Sheila on this framework, 1 year, kind of the step one.
We are at a tie then, 3 and 3. So we'll split it, we'll take it to the email for the people that aren't here. I think we all agree to a certain extent, with some of that, just some people want a little bit extra added. So we can put that in the email then.
And then just one more thing, but and that's it, because I think that all of our brains are close to popping. But one thing I did want to start you guys, I did find this a little interesting. So one of the comments from the attorneys were a couple of HOAs in Atria. So he did mention like the penalties. Now, because of the way it's structured in terms of it links to our noise ordinance, now you could potentially receive up to 15 days in jail. Now, I'm no attorney, but I highly doubt a judge is going to do that. It does say that, and in all seriousness, but is that something?
That's something that the current, that's what it says, or it's the noise ordinance.
The
It's
noise ordinance,
ordinance
but
that says
the penalty, because it links with the noise in terms of what the penalty is in the law. So it would, in theory, not. Let me start. again.
Our current noise ordinance has penalty of fines and up to 15 days in jail.
Correct.
Which is second, though, it's a violation, right?
In terms of, I'm just not sure.
It's a violation. It's not a misdemeanor. It's not a felony. So what's happening is, since I'm the town prosecutor, is no one's imposing any jail time. It would just be fines.
I thought so, but it was a concern. So if it makes, again, some people, I guess, feel better about it, more observed, it's potentially something that, because I know the city of Rye did this too, just looking at, they got rid of that because they also had something very similar to that. And their penalties are strictly just fines, but the fines progressively increase, like I said, the number of violations that you get. So I'm just personally curious to see how the committee would feel about that.
my personal feeling is I don't think anybody should go to jail for that. I also don't think the first fine should be prohibitive. I think it should be very, very small if it is going to be, because I know some of these, some of the towns have really big fines. You know, they're like $200, $300. And I think that's a little bit much. I mean, I know, like you said, if you do it multiple times, maybe that's a different story, but not for the first time that you break the rule.
Yeah, and again, just to be clear, like I said, is a judge going to sentence someone to 15 days in jail? Almost certainly no, unless they do it 100 times. And at that point, I think if you do that, then you're probably doing it as a political stunt. But it's just something to think about, is that maybe you could just do fines. Now I'm just trying to pull up Rye just to see what they did, if I can find it.
Okay,
But,
yeah, I just know that for the town, I've been before 2 judges and no judges imposing any jail time for stuff
Yeah,
like this.
and I would have thought so too, as well. But again, it is in there, but it's only because it's just the way it links up with the noise ordinance. Now, I don't know when that piece of that penalty was enacted, but that's just what it is right now. So, and because of that, that's what it would currently be unless it's changed by the trustees. But again, of course, it's just, you can make the recommendation or not to change that, but.
So my recommendation would be that it's only fines.
Mine as well.
Starting with warning and then fines and no jail time and all the hours and other things with the noise. But I jail time staying in this.
I guess.
I realize it was in for the other one, actually.
Do you want to just vote on this then, Robin? What's your thoughts?
Fines only to be determined by the trustees.
Brandy? Oh, sorry, it went mute. It muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I agree, but again, I don't think it's the jail time is used at all by any of the judges at this point.
Okay. Michael?
Yeah, fines only to the extent we can make them consistent with other municipalities, that would be better, but sure.
Shio?
Mine's only.
Okay, so that's unanimous then.
Yep, I'm just gonna read real quick what Rye has done. And again, doesn't mean you have to copy them, but just so you guys have it and I did send in the email, but just so you guys have it for reference. So the first offense, it could be like up to $250. The second offense up to $350, and the third offense could be up to $1,500.
That's, I don't know. I think that's too much.
But like I said, it's just what they're doing. So it's just a guide to go off of, because
I still think we leave it up to the trustees, that we just
I
put it
agree.
in there,
Yeah, we'll leave that up to them. I think that
I agree with Robin.
I agree to leave it up to the trustees to make this determination.
Okay.
I agree as well.
Okay.
I think that covers just about the main ones too, at least I can think of. I mean, a lot of the other ones I think are.
There's just one other one.
Yeah, sure.
As a committee, we talked about going completely electric. But was that in the legislation? I don't remember anymore.
No, well, we voted on that. So when we did the vote for allowing electric during the summer, which is the point where we had restricted it before, we had 6 votes to yes, allow electric, 0 votes.
But
no.
we did not say you had to get rid of all gas blowing leaf blowers with this.
No, so there's still allowance for
I can't
gas
remember
during
what
those
we
times,
did.
the fall and the spring. You can still use the gas.
So
You
we're
just
not
need to figure out the
restricting completely the use of gas blowers.
No.
No, it's only.
Is that something that we want to, though, just take a vote on now quickly to understand where people feel about that? Because now that we've added an electric and they can use we theoretically are recommending that we can use leaf blowers all year long. Again, previously we were talking.
I'm torn on this one. I don't know if I'm really prepared to.
Yeah, I'm a little torn on it as well. So I would say maybe that's an email exchange.
Or maybe we can just leave it for right now.
That was kind of the thought, I guess. I think that was more the thought with the phases, was to implement that with the gas. So that gas goes away, but
I just didn't remember what
little-
we recommended, and I thought we recommended, we stopped at electric for summer. I don't think we were saying we would phase out gas. Did we?
No, no. So what it was before with the phases was just in general, the dates would just be more restrictive as far as like when blowers are allowed in general.
But we were saying gas blowers were allowed in the fall.
In the fall and in the spring, for spring cleanup and for fall cleanup.
But we
I don't
said
remember
during
the
the time
more who
period.
said it. It might have been Brandy. But I think that if we can just kind of turn people on with this to the electric blowers in general, and hope that the technology improves, that this could be revisited in a few years. I don't think that's a terrible thing, because I am still somewhat concerned that the technology isn't exactly where it should be, which I've learned in the course of this. So I think it's being very fair to just leave it, everything else the way it is. That's what I would vote for, leaving it the way it is.
Okay.
So is our rationale, just so that we can say that it makes sense, is the rationale that you can use electric all year long and you can only use gas during the heavy leaf, like fall time period when you need a stronger equipment? Is that our thinking?
Well, that's mine.
That would be my thought as well.
Would be fall and the spring.
Fall and the spring.
Well, no, not why in the spring for gas.
For I
Did
guess
we say that we're
cleanup.
going to allow? Because at that point it was banned. We had the ban for 5 months. So during those same I think it was 5 months. During those 5 months, we would allow electric now.
Correct.
Correct.
I guess we had it for the early spring cleanup.
Outside of that, then the way the law would read, the way we interpret it, you can use gas or or whatever you want outside of the period that it wouldn't be banned from May 1st to September 30th.
Right. I thought that's what it ended up being, our recommendation.
Correct.
Greg, can you refresh my memory on, I know that the memo was separate from the legislation, and I think I was the only one who commented on the memo itself that was submitted. And was that ever revised, and was that shared with anyone beyond our committee?
It went to the trustees. Because
it did go.
That's what it's for. It was a memo to the board. Again, most of it contained, again, of course, I'll let Bridget more comment on it, because again, she and Ashley, the ones who put it together, but just to give.
Was it revised at all? I know I found some like typos, but there was also like,
Ashley
I just didn't know if we had adequate conversation about how restricted it was in the phasing.
Ashley added a chart to it just to really kind of explain, because I did tell her and she understood that it could be a little confusing as it was first read. But a lot of it did contain some really important background information, and using the example
Yes.
from Bedford. But I would really prefer like that Bridget really, as the author, to really kind of talk about it.
Yeah, and I thought some of that background could even go in the legislation, but the part that I had,
Parts of it did, actually.
the only part I thought that didn't have adequate discussion within the sustainability committee was the proposed phasing, and especially the final year was very, very restrictive. So I wasn't sure how the memo was revised before it was sent to the trustees, or if everyone read it in its totality and kind of absorbed what the phasing proposed was.
So Ashley did put together the calendars that you see in that memo. And then I had a hand in the rest. And I believe that if we wanted to say that we're talking about doing just one set of dates and that's it. From what I've heard us kind of discussing before, do we want to vote on that to just have no phases and just one set of dates, which is the first one? and nothing else, do we want to try to vote on that now, or do we want to put that to an email vote?
Email.
Email, okay,
I think we're getting to the point to go to email and.
yeah.
Because then we're talking, do we have instead of one piece of legislation with these dates and we don't go any further, or do we want things phased in? And if we want it phased in going further, I think we need more discussion. So let's table that for email.
Exactly. Like I'm definitely
It's
pro
getting late.
phase, but I think more discussion is needed, not just email, but discussion as to what those phases are.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought we could have that conversation in email back and forth if people are willing to, if we don't have time to meet again.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yes,
that
I
could
agree.
be. Yeah, I think we can discuss that, because I think we kind of gone through a lot with our votes of the things we were going to vote on via email. So I think it kind of comes down to that and maybe like one other thing potentially. So.
And that's also the benefit of having not being subject to the open meetings law when we can do that. We can literally just go through email and state again, yay, nay. So thankfully for that. But I also just, because I keep remembering, and hopefully this is the last thing I remember, is in terms like because we did mention this earlier, but in terms like federal holidays, because not all of them fall within the proposed timeframe for May 1st, like Thanksgiving, for example. So maybe again, just to specify that would be included, that you can't use gas during that time period.
On holidays.
Yes, right, but the ones that don't already fall within May 1st, September 30th. Like Memorial Day already falls in with that, but like Thanksgiving and Christmas does not.
Okay.
I recommend keeping it consistent with the noise ordinance that is already in place and not making any changes for specific dates at this point in time. That's my recommendation.
I agree with that.
Me too.
I agree.
I agree.
Is that everybody?
Michael, did I hear yours? I'm not sure that I did. Okay.
So you're gonna send us an email for us to respond, and Jason would like to get our recommendations by the end of March, correct?
Yes.
So I'll send an email that goes over all these votes that we did as well. And that way, if the committee members who aren't here want to also submit their vote on anything, like we have the tiebreaker and stuff, they can do that. And then I'll also include the one or two things that we haven't voted on that need a little bit more discussion.
And there's a potential, yeah, if need be, to just table the currently planned hearing until the 25th.
I think that it would be a good idea in my mind to table it and give us a little bit more time versus trying to rush this.
At the end of March, and if need be, I mean, Jason will do it. I'm sure that the rest of the board wouldn't have an issue doing it as well. But I think before again, let's just see where we are in a couple of weeks.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a good night.
Night.
Everybody,
Stay on for just 1
I
minute.
love hearing everybody's points of
Thank you,
view.
Sustainability Committee.
Thank you.
Night.
Good night.
Wait, Jason, you still there? Jason? Jason?
Yeah, everybody's sleeping. We're too long.
Yeah, I wanted to know if he wants to leave. I mean, he can, but no, but just to let me just end the recording, and then just to the public, thank you for tuning in, and then just going to a private mini executive session.